Would have a seat, please? Council, are you back in place? So at this time, I'm going to call the special city council meeting to order for Tuesday, August 1st, 2017, and let the record show that the entire council is present. So first thing on the agenda is approval of the agenda. So Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Mr. Mayor, make a recommendation that the agenda be approved as published. Second.
So motion by Mr. Kilpatrick, second by Mrs. What? King. Why are you pointing at that? Mrs. King. Any further comment? If not, all those in favor, please raise your right hand. Motion carries unanimously. Next is our resolution, RS 17-079, receive fiscal year 2017-2018 proposed annual budget and plan of municipal service. And that's the first part. The second part is set the date of August 22nd, 2017 to hold a public hearing on the fiscal year 2017-2018 annual budget and planning municipal service. So at this time, Mr. Olson is going to present. So you're up, Mr. Olson. Got the shot yet?
All right, so Mayor, I'm a little bit confused about our process. I think I've got it now. What you have in front of you is the FY fiscal year 18 budget. It comes in 3 volumes. There is a section, there's one book that you have, looks like this one, and it is the all fund summary and the general fund. The next book you have is a little bit smaller, and it contains all of the enterprise funds. It contains the water and sewer fund. Doesn't. Okay, are we working now? Is it working? All right. So the second book you have contains the enterprise funds. The water and sewer, the solid waste, the aviation, and the drainage funds. And then there's a third book that contains all of the rest of the funds. So according to the way our process and our charter and so forth works, I'm required to present this to the City Council, which I am doing at this time. I'm going to ask that you set the times of the hearings that are required with the budget, and then we're going to go back into the workshop immediately following this part of the meeting. We'll go back into the work session, and during the work session we will begin to talk in detail about these budgets.
All right, that's how it is. So all we need is a motion and a second to set the date of August 22nd, 2017 to hold our public hearings. So with that, Mrs. Fleming.
Second.
I saw Mr. Rivera's hand go up there. So motion by Mrs. Fleming, second by Mr. Rivera to set the date of August 22nd, 2017 to hold public hearing on the fiscal year 2017-28 annual budget of planning municipal service. Any further comments, questions on that? If not, all those in favor, please raise your right hand. So motion carries unanimously. So with that, concludes all our items for our special city council meeting. So we just need a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Oakery, second by Mrs. Fleming. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. So we are adjourned. So with that, now we can take a break. And before we go on a break, I know that there's some people here, I think, according to Mrs. Fleming, for the HOP. The HOP, it's not on our agenda, but I told her one of the things that I would do is I would make mention that we do have a hearing. The HOP has a hearing on Thursday here at City Hall at 5 p.m. I know they have another one Wednesday in Harker Heights. It's being publicized, I think, in the newspaper. So those of you that are here for the HOP community center as well. So if you're here to hear on that, I know that most of the council, I know I'll be there for the one here on Thursday, so you guys are welcome to attend any of those. So with that, we're just going to take about a 10-minute break and then resume our workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Workshop back to order. So if everybody going to grab a seat there. And so with that, we're going to start with DS 17-089. Was that the planning session? Was that had to do with the budget and stuff? So Mr. Olson is also going to talk about our proposed FY 17 and 18 budget.
Thank you, Mayor. So this session starts our official detailed review of the fiscal year 18 budget. I'm going to start that by giving you the summary of the all fund summary, which is a summary of the entire city enterprise. And then we're going to drop down from there into each one of the funds, and we're going to start with the general fund. And we're going to review every department in order, the order that they're in the book. And any questions that you may have as we're going along, we'd be happy to field. I will say that we've reconfigured the room here today so that we have a camera in the room. We're going to record all of the work sessions on the budget. They will be posted online. If everything works right, this meeting will be posted tomorrow morning. It will be indexed so that people can go in and look. They can look at the whole thing, or they can look at any particular department that they may want to. The documents that you have in front of you will be posted online, and they will be filed with the city secretary, and they will also be at the libraries for the public to review if they choose. And in addition to these documents, there is a line item budget, and I'll say more about that later, but the line item budget is really a working document for our accountants. It's not a decision-making, policy-making document, but it also will be available, being filed with the city secretary and at the city libraries. Anyone choosing, including the city council, anyone choosing to look at that particular document is welcome to do so. They can do it at the city secretary's office, or they can do it at the library. So we're trying to be as transparent and welcoming into this process as we can.
Mayor? With that line item numbers, would they be able to be downloaded?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I would be able to download it.
Well, let me verify. Does anybody here know whether they can download and print the line item budget, or can they just look at it?
It'll be loaded as a PDF, so you can download the PDF.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. If there are no other questions, we'll open the biggest book, the one called All Funds Summary and General Fund. We're going to start at the first page and start working our way through it. I have plenty of microphones here. Do I know? Can I get rid of one, or do I need them all? All right. All right, am I still working? Am I still recording? Okay. On page 4, we begin the all funds summary, fiscal year 2018. And I will do this summary, and then I will do the summary for the general fund. And then we're going to have each department head come up and introduce their own budget following that. And we'll just go straight through the entire budget book. So the first thing I want to say is that while a budget is composed of numbers and it represents money, the numbers and the money represent service. It represents what we do with that, with those resources. And so our mission is critical. Understanding what our mission is critical to us so that we stay focused using limited resources to accomplish the most important things and accomplish them in the very best way that we can. As we've worked through the budget, I've spent a lot of time with our staff clarifying what each mission in each department is, so that as we make priority decisions, we make sure that we focus on our core mission and do the most important things first. So our mission in the city is to provide municipal services and facilities that meet the vital health, safety, and general welfare needs of our residents and sustains and improves their quality of life. That is the broad statement of what the city does. Each one of the departments will have a mission that is in harmony with that general statement. We have a vision to become the best city in Texas. We have a slogan of service, and we have values which I personally take very, very seriously. And we are in the process of building those values into how we do our work. For example, we have an annual performance appraisal for each of our employees. These values will be built into that performance appraisal so that we're continuously focusing on not only what work we do, but how we do it. If we go to the next page, our budget process has really come in 4 sections. The first one was to look at the history and the demographics of our city and of our financial situation. The second one was to examine our revenues and predict our income. The third one was to look at our expenditures and make sure that those expenditures fit inside of our revenues. Therefore, our budget would be balanced. That's a challenge. You all know that. You've dealt with this in past years, and it is a challenge. It's always a challenge to balance the budget because there are always things you want to do that exceed what your financial ability to do them is. And so really a good part of what budgeting means is disciplining yourself to focus back on the core mission and saying yes to some things and no to other things. And that is the hard work of a budget. And then the fourth item that we've looked at is the long-term sustainability of our city financial situation. And we have looked at that fund by fund to see what the future, as best we can, what the future looks like. In previous meetings, I've talked to you about, at length, about what the first 2 items is, the history, the demographics, and the revenue projections. This meeting is a continuation of that, and we're going to be talking about the expenditures and the long-term sustainability. If we go to the next picture, this is, it looks like a tornado. It's really a funnel. And what that represents is how we're going to go about looking at the budget and talking about it publicly and with the council. At the top of that funnel are what we call all funds. Sometimes I refer to that as the city enterprise, meaning the whole city. People think about the city, they think of the city, but the city is really comprised of a bunch of individual parts. And those parts are called funds. They are individual business entities that function inside the city. They are legally separate, they are financially separate, and they have to be treated separately. They do business with each other, but they are separate. So we're going to look, first of all, at the entire enterprise, the combination of all of those funds together, and what does that mean? Then we're going to drop from there down to looking at each one of the components of the enterprise, which is each one of the separate funds we will look at in detail. Then within each of those funds, we're going to drop down another level and look at the departments that make up that fund. And then we'll drop one level further than that, and that is to look at the budget categories inside of each department. The budget categories are a summary of the line items. We are not proposing to look at the line items in this series of discussions. And the reason we're not, for one thing, it's a government finance officer recommendation that not be done. And I think the reason that they make that recommendation is line items are for accountants. It's how they set up the financial system so that when a frontline manager says, I need to buy a widget, they write a purchase order and they put an account number on there, and that's a line item. When a certain kind of revenue comes in, a clerk takes that revenue and codes it to a specific line item, and that's how we keep track of the money coming in. But it's the combination of those, and I'll explain this a little bit further in the presentation. It's the combination of those line items that make up categories. For example, all of the line items that make up the cost of having people work for the city are personnel, is a personnel category. The materials and supplies it takes to supply the workers as they do their job is an operating or a materials and supplies category. Then we have a capital outlay category. So we'll be looking at the category level as we go through the budget. And again, if anybody wants to look at the line items, you're welcome to do it. I will tell you it can be very confusing to look at the line items, and the line items are not productive for management decision-making or for policy decision-making, and that's why we're not going to look at them. Let's go to the next page. As we look to the next several days, here's how I predict that the discussion will go. It could be different than this, but I think it's probably pretty close. So tonight we'll do the all funds summary, and we will begin with the general fund. I don't think we'll finish the general fund, and we'll carry it on into the discussion of August the 8th and finish the general fund and pick up the water and sewer fund. I think we can finish the general fund and the water and sewer fund on August the 8th. I also think that we can probably finish the solid waste fund discussion on August the 8th. If we're faster than this, we'll just move them up. But I think this is probably how they'll go. And then on August the 15th, we'll finish the balance of the funds.
Mr. Johnson.
Just a comment. I do understand your theory, how you presented the budget tonight. I would like to see the line.
Okay, and you're welcome to. You can check out a copy from the city secretary, or we can print you a separate one that you can take home and look at. All right, we'll make sure you get one.
Yeah, didn't she say it'd be online too? I think.
Sorry?
Didn't she say that it's going to be online too?
It is online.
Yeah.
Yes. So anybody can look at it. And then on August the 22nd, we will invite our community partners to come in and present to the council. These are entities that are exterior to the city organization that we contribute money to. For example, the Bell County Tax Appraisal, the Chamber of Commerce, the Economic Development Corporation, the HOP Transportation System. So all of the entities that we contribute money to perform a service on behalf of the city are those are what we call community partners, and we will ask them to come in and explain what they're going to do with the money we give them, and that will be on August the 22nd. Let's go to the next page. The next couple of slides I want to go over are kind of a real simplified summary of the presentation I gave you a couple of months ago on revenue and history and demographics. So this first one is our population. Up through 2017, those are actual numbers. Beyond 2017, there is a statistical regression that we run in order to predict what future population is going to be. That is a factor when we start looking at long-term sustainability. It's one of the factors that we look at to say, how are we going to be doing in the future? The next page compares our population to a group of benchmark cities that some are bigger and some are smaller. All of them have some characteristics that the city of Killeen has. And you can see we're about in the middle, a little bit above center in that group of cities. The next slide is household income. The ability to pay is also a factor that we have to look at when we're creating a budget. And again, you can see that we're about center, a little above center in that group of comparable cities. Also tied to the ability to pay is a number that we look at from the Census Bureau on persons living below the poverty line. And in this one, you can see that we actually have a smaller percentage of people living below poverty than almost all of the other cities that we compare to. The next slide is a graph dealing with inflation. Like the population number, we have actual inflation numbers through 2017, and the numbers beyond that are a statistical prediction of what we think they may be, what the inflation rate may be. Okay, the next slide, I'd mentioned a few moments ago that the city is comprised of a number of separate business entities called funds. Each of them are separate, but they do business with each other. For example, the general fund has an accounting department, it has a law department, it has an IT department, etc., that it basically sells services to these other departments. So, so the other funds pay for the services they get from the general fund. And some of them provide services that the general fund receives. So there is money that actually moves back and forth between those funds. I want to make it very clear. There's nothing unusual about that. Every city is pretty much the same way. There is nothing illegal about it or against any accounting procedures. It's the way cities work. What this graph is intended to do is to be very clear about how those funds interact with each other. So we've listed the funds, we've listed lines that go from one fund to the other with the amount of money that transfers between one fund and the other. Let's go to the next page. This page represents, it's what I call a donut chart. The outer ring shows the various sources and proportions of money coming into the city, and the inner part, the donut hole, shows where the money is being spent. So in one graph, you can get kind of a big picture of where the money's going and where it's coming from and where it's going. I have 3 donuts on this chart because one represents the proportions and the revenues and expenditures from 10 years ago. The center one is fiscal 17, last fiscal year, and the one on the right is fiscal 18, the one that we're proposing. So you can when you look at these donut charts, and you'll see several others as we go through the book, it gives you a picture of how the budget is evolving over time and where the priorities are. Let's go to the next page. The next page represents the expense categories across the city. And so what you're looking at there, the blue portion of each of those pies represents the personal services. It's what it costs for us to pay for the people that work for the city that perform the services that we're required to give. It's proposed to be about 52% of the fiscal 18 budget in total. The red portion is the operating costs. Again, these are materials and supplies that provide the tools and the things that the people need in order to do their jobs. The purple part is debt service, and the green part is capital outlay. And again, you're looking at a comparison 10 years ago, last year, and the proposed for fiscal 18. The next page gives you a summary of the fund balance or working capital. It's the same thing. There are technical terms. If it's an enterprise fund, it's working capital. If it's a governmental fund, like the general fund, then it's called fund balance. But it amounts to the same thing. It's how much money do you have in that fund that you're not spending this year. You're holding it for working capital or for emergency purposes or to improve your bond rating. And so as you look at that, the first line, for example, is the general fund. We are going to begin with $17.6 million in the general fund. We'll bring in about $82 million of revenue. We're proposing to spend $82 million of revenue. We'll end with the same number, and that represents 22.4%. Now keep in mind, our City Council adopted policy requires us to maintain between 22 and 25% in fund balance. And I think that's true across pretty much all of the funds. One of the things I will recommend at some point is that we take an examination a comprehensive examination of our financial policies, and we may want to tailor that fund balance requirement to each one of the funds. They're all unique and they're all different. They don't all need the same amount of fund balance. But right now, the policy says 25%. So you can look at each one of the funds, see what we're predicting in
Olson,
revenue. Yes, sir.
in reference to our fund balance, I know you made mention about our bond rating. When we had I think it was our investors or something, that was a question that we had asked. But there's always a question of how much that will affect it or not. And I think the response we got at that time, they said, well, it depends if it's within your policy. And so it would only affect it if it's below what your policy. So I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's something you can dig into and find out. So.
Well, we will, if we move ahead and have a comprehensive review of our financial policy, which I highly recommend, that is one of the questions we'll be prepared to answer. I can just tell you right now, from my experience, the higher the fund balance, the better the bond rating. It is not the only factor they look at in rating your bonds, but it is a major factor. And for example, if you were to say our policy is now we're going to maintain 2% of fund balance, and you think that's going to be okay as long as you don't go below 2%, you're going to be mistaken. The higher the fund balance, the better the bond rating. That's been my experience in it. So continuing on page 17, you can examine the entire city budget by looking at this page and seeing what's going to happen in terms of how much money where we're going to start with each fund in their fund balance or working capital, how much money we're going to bring in, how much we're going to spend, and how that's going to change the ending balances. Let's go to the next page. because employees are such a major part of our expenditures in the city, in each of our fund summaries and in each of our departments, we talk specifically about our employees because it's a major cost to the city. So this table on page 18 summarizes the number of full-time employees, full-time equivalent employees in each of the funds. So we're going back 10 years and looking at what we had 10 years ago, last year, and what we're projecting for next year. Down at the bottom, we have normalized the data because the city's getting bigger, the employee group is getting bigger. But what does that really mean? So we looked at the number of employees per 1,000 population just to normalize the data and get an idea of what it takes to serve our community. And what you see down there is 10 years ago, we had 9.9 employees per 1,000 population. Last year, we had 9.1, and next year, it looks like our projection is going to be 8.7. So over that 10-year, 11-year period, the number of employees per population is actually going down a little bit. And when I saw that, it became very natural. When the departments say to me, we're feeling stressed, we're having a hard time getting our work done the way it's expected, this is part of the reason that that's happening. We've got less people to do more work than we used to have. The next page compares our employee ratio to those benchmark cities. So again, we're kind of toward the center, a little bit below center when we compare to that benchmark group. You look at McAllen, for example, they have almost 17 employees per 1,000 population. I thought that was a mistake when I first saw it. I thought they probably have an electric utility, which most cities don't have, but when they do, the employee ratio goes way up. But on further examination, they do not have an electric utility. They just have a high employee ratio. And on the bottom end of that is Pasadena, which has 7.2 people. So we're kind of toward the center of that group.
Mr. Johnson has a question.
Yes, sir.
I was looking at 2007. I wasn't here in 2007, so how do I know as a council member that we didn't have duplication of positions or oversaturated city staff? Just because it was 9.9.
How do we know it wasn't overstaffed?
Yeah.
The only way I can answer that is by comparison to other cities. And you can see that the variance is so big, even then it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, you look at how we're doing our business and say, why is it that Killeen can do the city's work with 8.7 and McAllen takes 16? Twice as many people to do the same basic work. And part of it has to come back to what you expect to be done. So I don't know how to answer your question.
It's just a thought.
Yeah.
And then the second is, hasn't technology improved?
It has.
Where we rely more on technology and less on human labor?
Yes, technology has helped, and it's helped us become more efficient. And one of the things we need to do here is get even more technology to become even more efficient. I don't think it's made up that whole range of difference, though. Technology is not I'm pretty sure that technology is not the only answer for that change. Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. King.
Are we saying that we're going to replace people with technology?
No. I think what I'm trying to say is we're not going to replace people with technology, but we put technology in place, and it helps them become more efficient. And as you look to the future, you have to, well, theoretically, you can hire less people in the future because the ones you have are more effective at what they're doing.
And a lot of that, I don't know if you can break it down, but is there like a specific department, like our police department, as we grow as a community, then a lot of those departments have to grow with it. You know, people require more police officers on the street, and there is a lot of technology out there available, but, you know, a lot of times those are things that sometimes it's hard to get through because of the initial cost. You know, we've had some great presentations here that would be more efficient, and I always remember go back to our water meters where, you know, you put electronic water meters, it creates more efficiency. It doesn't require people to go out there and open up the thing, so it would reduce the staff time, I think. But the challenge that we as a council have is it requires an initial cost for a lot of this technology to see it, you know, produce some of the results over the long term. And I think that as a city, those are the things, because it's the same thing with the police department. I know there's a lot of equipment out there that's available to make their jobs more efficiency. When I go to a mayor's conference, they have one that's just recognizes shots like that, faster response. But the challenge is that costs money, so.
Thank you. I do think that we haven't had a chance to, we haven't had the time to analyze this as much as we need to, but one of the things we've started doing is we look at our long-term model and trying to predict what the future looks like. We look at the number of police officers we have per population, per 1,000. We look at the number of firefighters. We're also starting to look at the number of people we have in the Parks Department per population and per acre of ground that we need to maintain. We're looking at the number of custodians that we have per 100 square feet of building to maintain. As we add, as the city grows and we add more things that we have to take care of, more miles of streets, more miles of water line, more miles of sewer line, we need to be thinking about adding the people it takes to manage and maintain those assets as well. And I don't think we've been thinking about, the evidence that I've been looking at suggests that we haven't been thinking about it quite in those terms. And I think we need to do more of that. And I think, maybe back to Mr. Johnson's question, I think when you look at how do we know that that is the right number? How do we know that the relationships and the ratios are right? And I think that's going to have to come back to benchmarking best practices and looking at benchmark cities who are doing a good job. And that's how I've done it in the past. It's going to take us a while to get to that level of management, but I think that's how we do it. I think we've got to look at how many people per acre of park are we using to maintain it, to maintain our assets, and how many people per acre are other cities using? And when you look at best practices, how do we compare to that? And if we find somebody who's doing it better than we are, with less people and less money, what are they doing that's different than what we're doing? And we can learn from them. And that whole best practice benchmarking process is a way to continuously improve. And that's, in my mind, that's where we're headed. I wish we were there today, but it's just going to take a little time to work that through. Okay, so I'm on page 20. This is a summary of the changes we're proposing in the budget. For example, I'll read a couple of these so that you understand how to read the chart. In the general fund, we are proposing in the budget that we reduce 44.7 full-time equivalents. 40 of those positions are currently vacant, and 3.8 of them are occupied. So when you, and we've listed each one of the funds, so you see what the change in staffing is in each of the funds. So in total, across the entire city, we're reducing 50 positions in the budget, unfunding them. And of that 50 positions, 45 of them are vacant at the current time. 5 of them are occupied, and we are proposing that those 5 occupied positions that we're going to eliminate from the budget, that they be funded through January to give the incumbents time to find other employment or to make an appropriate transition. And that may be inside of the city. You know, when we have vacancies, they might apply for another job in the city in a different location, or they might transition to something outside of the city. So that is one of the impacts that we're looking at. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Have you notified the 5 employees?
No, we have not. Well, I shouldn't say that. I've left that up to the departments, and I think they're waiting until we introduce the budget tonight in order to have conversations with those 5. And again, it's not like we're going to talk about the budget for another 3 weeks and then adopt the budget on September the 19th and then tell them on October the 1st they don't have a job. If this goes through as proposed, what we'll do is say, you're affected by it, you've got 4 months to make a transition, and we'll help you all we can.
Mrs. Fleming.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. These 5 positions you're referring to, most of these people in the 5 positions, aren't they, I'm hoping that they're ready to retire anyway. Aren't they coming up in January? I think some of these people are ready to retire. So it wouldn't affect them that much anyway.
I do know that a couple of them are
Yes,
ready
sir.
to retire.
That's what I thought, yes, sir.
Yeah. I don't know that they're all ready to retire, but I think most of them
I
are.
think
Or
most
some of them
too.
are.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, let's go on to page 21. What I want to talk about with this section are the priorities and the issues that we have considered as we put the budget together. This will take a few minutes, but I think it's important that we go through each one of these and talk about what the issue, what the priority is, and what we've done about it or not done about it in the budget. First page is the council priorities from our first session of setting priorities several weeks ago. And I'm going to go down through each one of these and just give you my comments on them. The first one, well, actually the first 2 are kind of related. Infrastructure is an issue and a priority of interest to the council, as is long-term capital improvement planning. So I have checked we have addressed the first issue in the budget, and let me say what that means. We haven't fixed all of our infrastructure problems, but what we have done is identified certain infrastructure issues that are pressing on us that came forward in the budget, and we have funded the most pressing ones of those. The capital improvements planning, what we're doing in the budget is, up to this point, the operating functions and the capital functions have been blended in each department. That creates 2 challenges. The first one is managing a blended budget of operations and capital becomes very, very difficult. And when you manage it from year to year to year, it's hard to go back and compare operating expenses in one year versus operating expenses in another year, because blended in with that are capital expenditures, which typically are one-time expenditures that tend to boost your budget one year and lower it the next year. And so being able to compare from year to year is difficult. So what we're doing in this budget is separating the capital from the operations and creating a capital fund a capital account in each of the operating funds. And with this budget, we have started the process of capital improvement planning. By doing that and addressing in a funding plan the most pressing priorities that came forward during this budget cycle. Now, that doesn't fix the entire problem, and it doesn't meet the entire intent of the council in this process. So what I've done is tasked our Public Works Director with continuing that work and creating a comprehensive capital improvements plan, which he has been working on now for a couple of months, and I anticipate it being far enough along that we can have a conversation with the council about it around the first of the year. So on that one, I have checked, we have partly addressed the issue. We're working on it, and that will continue. Public safety is a priority, and I've put down here that we have addressed it. You will see that we are generally compressing our budget, but public safety continues to get the lion's share of that budget. And so it's a priority. It's getting less money, but it's continuing to get the high percentage of the budget that it has always gotten. Economic development is a priority, and I put down here that we have addressed that issue, and we have done so by continuing to fund the Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development functions at the same level we did last year, which is half of what it was the year before. But we continue that funding. Now, that doesn't mean, again, it doesn't mean we fixed that issue. I do believe that we need to get more engaged in working with the Economic Development Corporation, setting our policies, setting our priorities, and engaging with them more. But that's not the budget issue. The budget issue is putting the money in there that would allow us to do those things. The next several issues, growth preparation is a policy planning discussion that we need to have. It may become a budgeting issue, but it's not this year. So I put that as a future discussion item. Rancier Avenue is a capital project that will need to be addressed in the comprehensive capital plan that we're working on, and we'll talk to the council about in January. North Killeen is the same. Balanced growth is a policy issue that is for discussion, not so much for budgeting right now. The long-term stability, I've put down here that we have partially addressed that. And the way we've done that is that we've addressed as many of these priority issues in the budget as we can. We have a long-term projection of what our financial situation is. So we have not resolved the challenges that we have financially, but we are beginning to address them, and I think that's why I put partly addressed. Public-private partnerships, again, is at this stage more of a policy discussion than it is a budgeting issue, although you will see on a couple of pages back, I have identified a couple of areas that I think we could study to determine if we wanted to deal with public-private partnerships in those areas. And then employee retention is also a priority, and we have partially addressed that by proposing in this budget that we fund the step increases. Now, what we are not funding in this budget is the pay inequity that exists in our system. So we've got some employees that, if you look at the marketplace, we've got some employees that are paid about where the market is, some that are a little bit below the market, and some that are a lot below the market, as much as 35% below the market. We are not proposing to fix that problem yet. And the reason we're not is, as I have looked at our classification and compensation systems, I don't believe they're functioning well. And they're certainly not functioning in a way that is manageable and sustainable by our staff. So we need to fix the classification and compensation system before we put money into it. And I think we need to take fiscal 18 and fix the system and in fiscal 19, look at putting money in to fix the pay inequities that are there. I wish it could be different than that, but even if we had the money today, I would not recommend putting it in because it would only aggravate the internal inequity that exists between jobs. So we really do need to fix the system before we fund it. These next couple of items, charter knowledge is a workshop item. We need to put it on the council's discussion calendar. The Bob Gilmore Center is a capital project that we need to put into our capital planning for January. Making the budget understandable. I've kind of anticipated. I put down that we've actually addressed that. I guess we won't know until we get through the process and you all decide whether we have or not. Alternative revenue is a discussion and a policy issue for the future. Organizational understanding is a work session to talk about the organization. The Chamber and Economic Development Corporation updates, I put down we've addressed it because they will be part of our community partners that we invite in on the 22nd to tell us what they're doing. The community awareness and engagement is not a budgeting issue. And employee retirement, I do need to mention for a moment. I put down here that we have not addressed the employee retirement issue. So let me explain what is the employee retirement issue and why we have not addressed it. We have two retirement systems functioning in the city of Killeen. One of them is the fireman's, I forget the exact name of it, but it's the firefighters retirement system. That's a separate system operated, managed by the firefighters. It is not managed by the city. And as far as I know at this point in time, it's healthy and it's functioning well. The other retirement system is the Texas Municipal Retirement System. We call it the acronym TMRS. This is a system that Killeen has and most of the cities in Texas have. It's a hybrid system. It is not a defined contribution system, and it is not a defined benefit system. It is a hybrid of the two. It's unique in the United States as far as I know. There are two ways to pay for that retirement system. One is called an annually repeating contribution, and the other one is called an ad hoc contribution. Let me explain the difference. The annually repeating contribution is where we hire an employee, we assume that employee is going to work for us for 30 years and then retire, and when they calculate actuarially how much money we have to have in the bank in order to pay for that person's retirement, they assume that we're an ongoing organization that will never stop. We're going to hire new employees every year. We're going to let them work for us for a long period of time, and then they're going to retire. And all the time, we're going to be hiring and retiring employees from now till the end of time. So they look at that actuarially and say how much money we have to contribute. So every year we have to pay a percentage of our total payroll in order to make that payment. And then they look at how much money we have in the account to say, are we funded well enough? Typically, when you look at that, a funding number that's between 70 and 95%, obviously the higher the better. But if you're above 70% in that range, you're viable. You're okay, as a rule of thumb. If you look at the city of Killeen this last year, under those conditions, we are funded at 69%, and it's going down, which means we have to make more of a contribution. And the reason we do is because for 10 years now, we have been making an ad hoc contribution. The ad hoc contribution assumes that you're going to be in business for 1 year at a time, not ongoing forever, 1 year at a time. And so the actuarials look at that and say, if those are the assumptions, then the city is about 82% funded. Well, there's a big difference in those assumptions. And I assure you, we are not an ad hoc organization. We are an annually repeating organization, and we need to go from making an ad hoc contribution to an annually repeating contribution. And that difference is about $4.5 million a year. And that is why I haven't addressed it, because we don't have the $4.5 million a year to put in there and write this thing. Now, Killeen is not unique in this situation. There are a handful of other cities in Texas that are in pretty much the same condition. Corpus Christi, the city that I came from, was in that condition. The only difference is they had been doing it for about 3 years before I got there, and Killeen has been doing it for about 10 years, which means the hole's a little deeper and it's going to be harder to crawl out of. This is not a one-year solution. So we've got to make, I think, the solution to this is to look ahead and add a percent, add $500,000 or $1 million a year each year for several years until we get our contribution back up where it needs to be to pay for the retirement. And we can have a workshop on this at some appropriate time, and we can show you what the next 30 years looks like under these circumstances, and it's not pretty. So retirement is a significant issue that needs to be addressed, that is not being addressed in the fiscal 18 budget. That was a lot of words. I have just about worn myself out.
There's some water right there for you, fresh water.
I've got some.
It's a lot of scary words, too.
Yes,
Not
sir.
just words, scary words, because what do you estimate when since we're doing the ad hoc, how far behind do you think every year we fall short as the longer it progresses? Because, you know, you're trying to play catch up, but you're catching up on a hole that's all just keep digging itself.
The hole keeps getting bigger every year. When you just look at the contributions we're making every year, the contribution rate for ad hoc, the contribution rate for ad hoc and the contribution rate for annually repeating will cross each other in about 15 years. In 15 years, it will cost us more to contribute ad hoc than it will to contribute annually repeating. And but at that point in time, it's going to be too late to say, oh yeah, okay, now it's going to cost us more to be annually repeating, or more to pay ad hoc, we'll switch over to annually repeating. They are not going to let us do that, because the percentage of funding in our system will be so low at that point that they're going to force us to pay the higher rate in order to boost the rate. And that rate won't stop in 15 years. It just keeps going up and up and up. So it's an issue that we have to get a hold of now and be serious about fixing it. And it's a discussion item, and we're not just going to throw that on the council. I will come up with a plan and a proposal of how to fix it over how much time, and then we'll have a discussion with the council about that, and we will build that into a future budget.
And that's something that you can say about other areas too, because as a council, a lot of times, like I make mention, you know, we look at the immediate impact of our budget, and I think we need to start looking long-term. Like you said, this is something that should have been looked at over the long term, because when you're talking about that, another area that comes to my mind, which is our highest priority there, is our infrastructure. That's another area that sometimes we're thinking about the immediacy of it. And as this council has been told through professionals, it says the longer we put this out, the deeper in debt we get. And we're looking at millions, because as our infrastructure deteriorates, we're like fixing it now, and then we're not worrying about it later. Whereas, it's just digging a deeper hole there. So I think that as you plan, I think it's important that we figure out ways to look at the long term, not just the immediacy of it now. And I know that's hard because, like I said earlier, sometimes you find ways to implement it, but you got that initial cost that you have to come up with. And I think that as politicians, that's where our resistance is at a lot of times.
I appreciate you saying that, Mayor, because I do think that when a city finds itself in a financial stress time, it's predictable what's going to happen. They start looking for short-term solutions to the problem and hoping that the problem is a short-term problem. More often than not, however, the problems that are being faced are long-term problems, and you can't solve a long-term problem with a short-term solution. So the short-term solution under financial stress is, let's take a year and go from annually repeating to ad hoc. It'll relieve the stress, and then we'll go back to annually repeating. Well, I'm sure that's what happened 10 years ago. And here we are. So part of the thing we have to do as a city is start looking long-term. We shouldn't be just looking at 1 year. We need to start looking multi-year and looking long-term in order to make good decisions for the city.
And I agree. Like I said, it's all departments. You talk about their growth rate. We got to look at, we need more employees over the long term, because you look at that population, it's just straight across the board that everything's going to grow. We're going to need a lot more planning for that in the future. So, Mr. Johnson.
I keep hearing about infrastructure. I understand that is important. We are here because of past mistakes or decisions that were made. What I'm not going to do is unload everything onto the taxpayers. And that's one of the reasons why I fought hard against transportation utility use fees and property taxes. Short-term problems, long-term problems, but the short-term solution is not to dump our problems back on the taxpayers. The taxpayers are taxed out.
That's all right. I don't think we were talking about the tax. No.
Okay. So I'm on page 2 of this handout. And this is, these are the priorities from the second session of talking with the City Council about priorities. Again, public safety, recruiting, and retention came up, and I'm saying we partly addressed that because recruiting and retention is not just a salary issue, but it is it's a salary issue, but that's not all of it. But when you look at that piece of the salary, we are continuing in this budget to fund the step increases for public safety officers. And while the public safety officers are slightly below the market rate, they're probably closer to the market rate than any of the other groups of employees in the city. So we have not proposed to bring them right up to market because we're not proposing to bring anybody right up to market in this budget. But it does remain an issue to be solved at a future time. Bring in better paying jobs was a priority. I think that's more of a policy issue and engaging with the Economic Development Corporation than it is a budget issue at this point in time. Not that it couldn't become a budget issue, but it's not yet. Future street funding mechanism, again, is a policy issue more than a budgeting issue at this point.
Mrs. King?
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, Ms. Olson, I didn't hear you when you was talking about public safety, recruit, and retain. You said it's partially addressed. Did
Yes.
you say how?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I put down partially addressed because we are continuing to fund step increases for public safety officers.
Mr. Okry?
With funding those, we can bring public safety officers on but it's still, you can have like, what is it, safer, no, what is it, what is it?
Safer grant? Or-
Your safer grants in 14-15, there's still some things out there from 14-15, at least for 15, where you still have, was it 12 officers?
Yeah.
And they can go through the process and hit the street and say, you know what, I don't want to do this, so you're back at square one. So it's, but you still have the whole of the, we're still talking about the whole of the public safety, fire and PD that you're talking about recruiting and retaining.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I think I've asked this 2 times. More than likely probably before you got here. Police Academy. On average, it costs us, what, $98,000 for the 18-month program?
For, I'm sorry, for which program?
For the Police Academy. But there's no, what's the word I'm looking for? Commitment requirement. Why is that not so? Or at least a 3 or 5 year commitment. If the taxpayers are paying to send these fine men and women through our Police Academy, then I think the taxpayers deserve some type of commitment.
That's a good point.
I think from,
So do I have
just
somebody
Chief
on
here, because I
staff
think at one
to
time they
keep track?
explained that, don't they have a commitment of 1 year or something like that when they go through the academy?
Yes.
Sorry, I wasn't hearing everything.
Chief Bianchi, what you,
Reference to a commitment by the person who is hired and goes to a police academy? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me. Yeah, I know in terms of legally binding, from what I've talked in the past, you can have someone sign a contract that says, look, if we hire you and we train you, that you would give us commitment of X, 1 year, 5 years. Whereas I don't know how legally binding that would be in terms of if somebody chose to leave, whether we could, I mean, how are you gonna make them stay? In terms of getting back the money, I guess, and it may be more of a legal question on how we would collect on that. So say we turned it into money, that if you came to work for me, and you didn't stay a year or 5 years, then you would owe us X amount of dollars. Then it would probably be the legal department have to weigh on whether that would be something viable to collect.
And again, this, I'm not trying to micromanage that. Falls within the preview of the city manager. However, as a taxpayer's advocate, I have to ensure they're getting the best bang for their buck. And if we're paying $98,000 per year to send officers through a 18-month course, and then as soon as they graduate, they leave off somewhere else, and these other agencies are picking them up, then we are a training ground. And I don't think that's fair to the citizens, and I also don't think that's fair to the taxpayers, because someone's paying for this.
But then you also gotta look at if they failed the program. If a person didn't complete the basic police officer academy or failed to be able to perform on the street, and we're the ones saying that you're failing, then do we have them pay us back for that? And there's some things that when you're in the course of hiring and training that you don't know until they get out on the street whether or not they'd be able to engage or not engage. In which case we would have to step in and say, you know, this isn't working. You don't have the skills that we need, and we won't know that from a classroom aspect. But those are all things that need to be analyzed. I don't want to take up your time, but those are things that we've looked at in the past.
Point well taken, and just
Well, and I'll tell you, we'll look at that. We'll look at that as a policy now and see what it does. We'll look at it and see if that's even feasible and try to predict what that would do to our recruiting and
Ms. King, you had a
whether
question?
whether it would.
My question was for the interim chief. Is there any, you can answer this, sir, you have the experience. Are there any other cities that require a police officer or a firefighter, if they go through academy and they choose to leave within the 1 year or 2 year that they have to pay money back? Have you ever heard of it before?
I've heard it discussed, but I've never I've never been in a city nor know of a city that does that. Do you, Chief? Yeah. I was talking to a military officer, a friend of mine, over the weekend that just finished a school, and he still owes the Army 5 years. So, I mean, the idea of committing service for training is, it's not a foreign idea. People do that. Organizations do it.
Mr. Mayor,
Mrs. Fleming.
question, for, Ms. Young, I don't know if she can answer this or
She,
not.
she's right behind you.
Oh. Well, you can come up here, because you may take a little minute to answer this question, since we're on this subject. On the average of a number of officers going to the academy, do you have the exact data of how many at this present date have quit and have gone to other jobs? Do you have that data right now that we can sort of look at, and when Mr. Olson is doing his study, you know, have an idea of how many have stayed there, how many have gotten out, how many have gone to other cities? Because I do know, and I brought this up as well as Mr. Johnson, we both piggyback on what he said, is that as the number of people, what can we do to keep our officers here to stay in this area? What can we do? Whether it's a contract or what can we do? So could you provide us with that data if you do have it, ma'am?
Yes, I have it in general terms. Some people, when they leave, don't tell us a specific
Okay.
reason. They'll just say personal reasons.
Yes,
Most of them, there's a conversation,
Yes,
or
ma'am.
it's a failure to train. So I can work something up and send it to them.
Yes, ma'am. I think it would help when our city manager starts working up his program of what we can do to prevent this.
Mr. Mayor,
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Rivera.
can we go back to the city manager briefing? Because I believe every department will have an opportunity, and every question is important for those departments. But I think we should go back to the issues.
Okay, let's get back on track.
Yes, sir. Trying to think where we left off here. Bring in better paying jobs. Again, that's an economic development policy type issue. Future street funding mechanism is a policy issue. Balance current plans with future money. We've started to look at our long-term sustainability, and that's why I put down we've partly addressed it. There's still a lot of work to be done in this area. Balanced growth is a growth policy discussion. The Gilmore Center is a capital improvements project that we need to put into the capital improvements plan. Future water supply is potentially a capital improvement, but it's also a planning issue more than a budget issue right now. More free youth activities is a budget issue, but we have not addressed it. When you get to the parks budget, you'll see we're cutting back. We're not adding programs. We're actually cutting some programs. Employee retention and compensation. We partially have addressed that, again, because we're funding step increases. We're not addressing the whole compensation issue. And eliminating underperforming property or assets. We need to have more discussion on that before we do anything with it so that we can understand it a little bit better. On page 3, we start priorities from the city manager's priorities, things that I've observed and thought about as we've worked with the budget. The first priority is to have a balanced budget. We have achieved that. We're proposing a balanced budget to the city council. The second one is that we maintain our policy on reserves and fund balance, and we are doing that. The third one is we deal with debt management. We are staying inside of our policies and actually reducing the percentage of property tax going to debt management this year. That's more of a mathematical calculation than anything we did to change how we're doing business. We want to make sure that all of our departments can meet their core mission. And while that may be arguable in some cases, I believe that they all can meet their core mission. that we address a comprehensive plan. It is time to look at our comprehensive plan, and I believe that we need to add to our comprehensive plan not just land use, but management and policy issues that are comprehensive to the organization. So we've put a provision in there to begin to address that. I think it's a priority that we should address transparency. We're doing that by funding a modernization of our webpage and creating a communication plan that will take us into the future. The Killeen Arts and Activities Center and the movement of City Hall, which we've talked about in a recent meeting, we are funding that movement as well in the proposal. The Economic Development Corporation, we've talked about before, and we are funding that. The Chamber of Commerce, we're funding. Rosewood Street is a priority that the council has been talking about, and in this budget, we do propose a funding strategy in this budget to accomplish that project. Health insurance is a priority. It was easy to deal with this year. In the past, our health insurance, our employee health insurance has been going up about 8% a year, and this year it went up 0. So we have addressed it. It was easy to address this year because it didn't go up. But we can't count on that into the future. And as we look long term, we put an 8% progression in our assumptions on that. I've also asked the HR department, and I've asked Ann to help them to start looking at the possibility of self-funding our health insurance, which I don't know is going to make a big difference in the cost of that benefit initially. I think it will in the longer run. Within a couple of years, I think we'll start seeing benefits because I think we can control our losses better by self-funding, and we can do more with wellness programs through self-funding. Rolling stock replacement has been an issue here, particularly for the general fund. And we are fully funding a rolling stock. I'm talking about cars and trucks and various kinds of equipment. We are fully funding a replacement program from the general fund and the other funds in this proposed budget. I think the average age of our rolling stock is about 15 years. And it just becomes unreliable. And we have good people that will be unable to do their jobs if they don't have reliable equipment to do their jobs with. So I think it's important that we turn this corner and get this moving in the right direction. And this year we fund it, and we anticipate funding it every year from now on. So this is one issue that I think we have addressed in this year's budget. The jail has been an issue in previous years that it is a concern. We are proposing to fund all of the jail positions and continue with that program. Now, we're going to get a new chief. He's probably going to take a second look at that and just make his own decision about what is most efficient for us. But until we get further insight from him, we're going to assume that the jail is an ongoing practice, and we're going to make sure it's continually funded.
Mrs. Fleming?
Mr. Olson, at the training last Thursday, a question was asked, was the jail going to continue to close or not? And there were so many people had the assumption that it was still going to be closed. So we might need to try to get that understanding that the jail is not going to close, because a lot of people were asked by council members, when is the jail going to close? So that might need to be. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, my answer is we're not going to close it. I'm going to give the new chief a chance to review it and give me his, but it's not going to close for financial reasons. It will, if it closes, it would be for management and efficiency reasons, not for budget reasons. I'm going to need him to weigh in on that for his own, after he looks at it and makes his own decision. My initial impression is it makes sense to have it, and we should have it, but I'm not the expert, and I'm going to let him weigh in on that. Risk management is an issue. Let me briefly explain that to the council. Risk management, I'm talking about I'm talking about our liability insurance, our property insurance, and our losses due to injuries and automobile accidents and crashes and things of that nature. We have had, the only part of a risk management program that we've been operating in the city is a workers' compensation program, and we hire an outside consultant to help us with that a great deal. We have somebody on the inside that works with it as well. But all of the other aspects of risk management, we have basically not been doing. And what that has resulted in is our insurance premiums last year went from $200,000 a year to $300,000 a year. And it's going to go up again as those losses continue. So I'm proposing in this budget that we start a risk management program, that we put a couple of people, experts, internal to staff, that can manage a risk management program, that can teach us and train us on a routine basis how to prevent loss, how to reduce accidents, etc. Now, two things happen from that. As we look to the future, we should be having less losses because that's what risk management is. It's a reduction and an avoidance of loss through good operational practices. So we should see a lower, and let me back up and say the cost to us isn't just the insurance premium. It's also the cost of the medical insurance that it takes to heal somebody who's been injured. It's the workers' compensation. It's the actual property loss of losing a vehicle. I mean, when you add all of that up, it's a staggering number every year. So our intent here is to reduce those costs, avoid and reduce those costs by adding a risk management program into the city. I don't think it's going to change anything for at least a year, but after a year we'll see reduced costs, we're going to have lower losses, and we're going to see a reversal in our premiums. They should start going from $300,000 and start moving themselves back down. We should be able to cut that insurance premium in half by doing a risk management program. So this is something which you may not see immediate results, but it will pay for itself, I am convinced, over a relatively short period of time. The joint land use is an effort that we're making. There's no budgetary impact this year on that. I think there could be in the future. We have finished and paid for our portion of the joint land use study, and now we're starting into the implementation phase. The implementation phase initially is going to impact primarily policy setting. So they're going to be suggesting that we change some of our development codes and some of our zoning codes and so forth to help make us more compatible with the use of the military operation here in Killeen. It could eventually turn into a budget issue if the suggestion is that we buy some property and create some buffers, but we're not seeing that yet. Financial stability, I say we partially have addressed that through our long-term projections. Terminal pay, let me take just a moment and explain that issue. When an employee completes their term of service with the city and they retire or otherwise leave, most of them have accrued some vacation time or sick time that we need to pay them for. That's what we call terminal pay. In the past, when they've left us, departments have paid for that cost out of their operating budgets. We've already challenged in my view, we've already challenged the departments enough by telling them they had to meet a lower budget target and squeezing the budget down. I would like to see them have as much authority and as much flexibility in their budget as they possibly can in order to use their resources creatively to meet their mission. So I want to stop stealing money from the departments. I want to stop taking this money and other money away from them and allow them to manage their own budgets as best they can. So we have put $300,000 in a non-departmental account for terminal pay. Now, the challenge with that is we don't know how much the terminal pay is going to be. Because that has been blended into the department budgets, we don't know from an enterprise perspective whether it's going to be more or less than that number. That's our best guess. At the conclusion of this fiscal year, we will have a really good idea of how much money needs to be budgeted for terminal pay. So that's what that issue is. So we have put $300,000 in a non-departmental account. And let me hasten to say, I cannot make 100% guarantee that I'm not going to go into a department and steal their money. If this terminal pay takes more than $300,000, I'm going to have to pull it out of the departments in order to meet it. If something really strange happens in terms of the operations and our budget turns out that we're not bringing in as much money as we thought, or some disaster happens that we can't predict at this point, I'm going to have to go in and steal some of their money. But barring that, I want them to have authority over their budgets and flexibility to use them in meeting their core missions. Compensation and pay equity, I've already talked about that. The TMRS ad hoc versus the annually repeating, I've talked about that. I've talked about Rancier. I have not talked about Chaparral. We have not funded that street in this budget, and we don't need to fund it in this budget. It's probably a couple of years out yet before we need to try to deal with that. 4, radio upgrades we partially addressed. I think that's called a P25 requirement from the federal government, which basically says all public entities have to become interoperable. Everybody's got to be able to talk to everybody else, and that means they've got to upgrade their radios. And we've got a couple of years to get that done. We've got one fund that we're able to do that with this year. And we have several more funds that we still need to do it in, so we are partially addressing it. The Gilmore Center we've talked about. There's been talk in the past about an animal shelter. We are not addressing that. It will roll forward into our capital planning. The Mounted Warfare Museum, same thing. And street maintenance, I do need to take a moment with. Several years ago, we had a study done that told us that, I'm trying to remember the numbers, and I'll do my best. I hope I don't slaughter it, David. We have about, at that point, we had about $17 million of deferred maintenance on the streets that needed to be done. We were putting in, I'm going to say, $500,000 or so dollars a year. Maybe it was $800,000 a year.
50.
Somebody said a number?
750.
$750,000 in annual maintenance. And what they said was we needed to boost that up to just short of $2 million a year. And if we didn't do it, our $17 million deferred maintenance number would be, within 5 years, would go up to about $40 million. Well, here we are 4 years later, and we're probably $40 million of deferred maintenance. So that issue has not been addressed for the 5 years that we've known about it, and I have not addressed it in this budget for financial reasons. That is something we need to deal with.
And that's something that, wouldn't that fall under our infrastructures? That's getting back to a lot of the infrastructure things that we have. So I think when the council looks at it and says, you know what, our street maintenance, as far as me, I'm not speaking for the council, but I look at that as infrastructure. That is where our infrastructure is deteriorating. A lot of our street maintenance, especially in the north side of Killeen.
Correct. There needs to be a discussion about that. It's one of those things like retirement. we can't continue to kick that can down the road. We're going to have to do some, well, I guess we can continue to kick it down the road, but at some point, somebody's going to have to pick that can up, and it's going to be a pretty heavy can when they finally get to it. So I do think that we need to start addressing this issue. We need to figure out where we're going. We need to make some hard decisions about how we're going to do it. And, but it's not addressed in this budget. This next group are city issues that either the council has come up with or staff has come up with as something that we need to be dealing with, and that is the city council protocol. We need to review that, and we're prepared to go. As soon as this budget's adopted and as soon as the council has time, we're ready to talk about city council protocols. I think that's going to be a critical discussion. I'm actually looking forward to it. I think it's going to help us a lot. The next issue we need to talk about is financial policies. We need to have a comprehensive financial policy, and I think after we get through with this budget, the timing will be great to go through and talk about it. By the time we finish this budget, we'll be ready to have that discussion with the city council. And I'd like to see a comprehensive discussion about our financial policies and have the council adopt a comprehensive financial policy to guide us into the future. Capital improvements planning, around the first of the year, we'll be ready for that. Self-funded health insurance, it'll be sometime after the first of the year before we're ready to talk about that. Airport funding is something that the council's gonna have to deal with that. You'll see in more detail when we get to the airport fund in another discussion or two that the airport is slowly bleeding out its fund balance. And that's going to put the city council back at making one of three decisions. You can either let it continue to bleed out until it is completely bled out, and then you're going to be forced to do something with it. You can look now at whether you want to amend the parking benefits and bring in more revenue through the parking benefits in order to level out that fund. Or you can decide to start subsidizing the airport fund from the general fund. That's really what it's going to come down to. Now, we'll be prepared, not during the budget. We are not proposing any changes in fee structures anywhere in the budget at this point in time. But that is a discussion we need to have at a future time to decide how we're going to address that problem. And so I'm just I guess I'm warning you now that that's out there. We can put it off for probably up to 4 years. In about 4 years, I think that all of the fund balance will be done, and the city's going to be forced to do one of the other two things that I talked about. Then this last section are what I think are privatization possibilities. I am not saying that we should go right out and privatize these operations. I'm saying that we should study them and decide if there really is opportunity here. I think there may be, and that is in the golf course, the water park, and the recreation center. Using privatization and private management, we might be able to do just a little bit better than what we're doing ourselves. I don't know that for a fact. I think it needs to be studied.
One of the things I noticed you don't have on there, which is one of the things we're conducting now, it's with our solid waste. So maybe you can kind of mention that or talk about that.
I did not put solid waste on there because we're already studying that one. And the council brought it up about 6 months ago, and right after I came to work here, and gave me 6 months to examine it, look at it, and report back to the council what my findings are. We are nearly complete with that, and so when the budget's adopted, right after the 1st of October, we'll be prepared to come back and report to the council what our findings were.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Rivera.
this is a very big list, I could see. And, but one of the main things that the city council is supposed to be doing is policy and ordinance. Is there any way during the maybe next year or sometime that you bring out those policies, ordinance that really are not effective? They just in the book, but there's no way to follow up on them, because there's a lot of policies out there that really, they're just in the book, and that's about it. There's no way to look into those compliance?
What I, what I propose and what I intend to do as we, excuse me, as we finish our budget discussions, I intend to take all of these issues and put them on the board and ask you to prioritize it. We need to address them all, but we can't address them all at one time.
Sure, well, definitely.
So I'm going to make a list out of them, put it on the board, have you tell me which ones you think are the most important.
Okay.
I do want to enter my own idea, and that is, I think protocol is number one, and I think financial policy should be number two.
I'm just gonna speak for myself only. I keep my nose away from operational. That's your baby. I don't think that's me to say this is number one, number two. I don't run this every day. I run policies, and so you could go ahead and comply your job. But that's what you want, that's what I do.
This is the work of the city council. Making decisions
Sure.
about these things is what the council needs to do.
That's what we need to do.
And I'm going to do my best to help you do that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so.
Johnson. Mr.
back
Johnson
to-
has a question.
Just a comment. When that time comes, when we talk about these three facilities, I do think we should, it would be good to look at policy as well when it comes to our rental policy. There are several city facilities that we're not maximizing the income potential because of the hindrance of the policies.
Okay, and we can certainly build that into the discussion, and just for what it's worth, my style of helping the council with this, I will bring forth a policy issue. We'll do our homework as a staff, we'll put it out on the table and do the best we can in a meeting. But we also know that what's going to happen is you're going to ask a whole bunch of questions. So when I'm talking about serious policy issues, we're not talking about a one-time discussion. We'll come in, make a presentation, get your questions, come back the next time and answer the questions, and it'll be a give and take until all of your questions and all of your concerns are completely exhausted. So, like what Mr. Johnson just said, if we're approaching some subject and he wants to look at a dimension of it that maybe we haven't prepared, or any of you do, we want you to ask the questions so that we can go back and make sure that we have fully explored every dimension of every policy issue. Okay, so that concludes the all funds presentation. Now, with that presentation, the council should be able to sit back with that presentation and understand what's happening in the city budget from the highest level. That's what's happening across the entire enterprise. Now what we're going to do is take our first dive at that second level in that tornado that you looked at, and we're going to start looking at the general fund. I'm going to give you a summary of the general fund, and then we're going to go department by department through the general fund. So if you'll turn to the section called General Fund, we have the General Fund Summary, Fiscal Year 2018. We focus in on the mission of the General Fund, which is to provide general operations of the city, and it is primarily paid for by taxes. And I need to say this. A lot of people do not distinguish between a tax and a fee. But there is an important difference between a tax and a fee that we need to understand. There's a technical difference and there's a practical application difference. A tax is something that you pay that does not necessarily bear any direct relationship to the service you get. If you are very wealthy with lots of property and you pay a lot of property tax, or even if you're poor with a lot of property and pay a lot of property tax, that does not relate to how much service you get. during any given year, you could pay thousands and thousands of dollars in property tax and never get any service at all from the police department or from the fire department, for example. But you're paying for it anyway. That is a tax. A fee, on the other hand, has a direct relationship to what you're getting. So when we talk about the water and sewer fund, we put a meter on your water line, and if you use an amount of water, we charge you for that amount of water. And if you use more water, we charge you even more. And it has a direct relationship to the service you're getting. If you're getting solid waste and you have a 60-gallon garbage can, the fee for that is different than if you have a 96-gallon garbage can, because you're getting a different service. And so when we look across the enterprise and we focus in on the general fund, the primary funding source of the general fund is taxation, not fees. It has some fees in it, but its primary revenue source is taxation, which does not necessarily have any relationship to the amount of service you get for the money you pay. Let's go to the next page. The general fund is 45% of the city's operations. That's what that blue slice of the pie tells us. As we were preparing the budget for the general fund, there were several principles that we kept in mind that were really important to us. The first one is that we balance the budget. There is no way in the world I was going to bring a budget to the city council that did not balance expenditures against revenues. So that was the number one thing that we looked at. Number two, no tax increases are being, no tax rate increases are being proposed in this budget. No fee increases are being proposed in this budget. Every department should be able to meet its core mission. I believe it does. The budget should be sustainable into the future. And it is, although it is not sustainable long-term. And I'll point that out in a minute. It's not as good as I wanted it to be. Previous financial commitments should be honored, and they are in this budget. As many of the structural budget weaknesses as possible should be addressed, and that's that 4-page document that we just went through. And again, I think we've addressed as many as we possibly can at this point in time. Infrastructure is a priority. We kept that in mind. Public safety is a priority. We kept that in mind. Economic development is a priority, and we kept that in mind and funded it as well. Employee retention, including pay equity, is a priority. And we've funded step increases. We have not solved the pay inequity issues in total. And the budget presentation should be comprehensible and understandable, which I hope it is. The next page we're looking at.
Mr. Johnson, you got a question?
Just a comment to what you stated, the difference between a tax and a fee.
Yes.
I do understand the difference between a tax and a fee. What I don't like is that when we get into a situation to where we try to hide behind a fee for revenue purposes. So if we need to raise property taxes, come out and tell the taxpayers we need to raise property taxes. Don't tell the taxpayers that you're not raising our property taxes, but you're adding on new fees. Same purse, same checkbook.
I understand.
I think it has.
That comes down to policy issues.
Yeah, I think that has to be that way. You know, I don't know if we've done that before where we've added a fee and not used it for that. So isn't that like a requirement?
Yes. Yes. Okay, so what you're looking at on this page, page number 30 in your book, are the donut charts that belong to the general fund. So what you're seeing around the outside ring are the revenue sources in approximate proportion to how big those sources are. And on the inside ring, how the money is being spent. So, and then you're looking at 3 of them. So we're looking at 2007, about 10 years ago. The middle one is 2017, and the one on the right is the proposed for fiscal 18. So what we're looking at there, the green part on the fiscal 18 is the property tax, and the percentage of our revenue that comes from that. The yellow is the sales tax. Then you've got transfers and interest and so forth around the outside of the ring. On the inside, the blue piece of the pie is appropriately for the police department. The red is for the fire department, and then you can see the others and see how they work. So you can see the proportions over 10 years and how the budget has evolved over that period of time. Let's go to the next page. This is an actual summary of the revenues being projected. Down the left-hand column are the various sources of revenue. Then on the columns, you got the actual amount that was received in fiscal 16, the amount of the budget in fiscal 17, and then we have an estimated amount. So we adopt a budget at the first of the year, and sometimes things don't work out exactly the way you predicted, and so you get close to the end of the year and you estimate more accurately what the year looks like. So we have the estimated actual for 17 and the proposed budget for 18. And you can see there that our estimate is that we will receive about $82 million in fiscal 18. And those of you that were part of the previous presentation I made about our revenue projections will remember that what is it, 4 or 5 months ago, we were predicting 80 million. As we've had a couple of more months of experience and we've gone through the reappraisal, it looks like about 82 million now.
Mr. Kilpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. City Manager, the decrease in intergovernmental, what is that?
Somebody had mentioned earlier, Mr. Kilpatrick, that we have a SAFER grant and a COPS grant. A SAFER grant in the fire department, a COPS grant in the police department. The difference you see there is the fact that we are now at the end of that grant period and those grants are falling off.
Thank you.
Page 32, I want to emphasize again, we're not proposing any change in the tax rate and we are not proposing any change in the fees.
How did, we came out about $2 million in what is expected, but how did the 100% disabled, I know that we were kind of expecting that those were going to be higher this year. So how much?
They went up about 25%.
25%?
Yes.
So how much does that affect the budget here?
I think our total exemption is about $500 million. So I don't know.
So about 4 million. Okay. Yeah, that's the number I was trying to get, the 4 million. So.
Yeah, so
every year, that's another area that's growing, and I think we have to kind of plan long-term for that, because I think that's going to continue to grow.
we do too. And we do too. I'll stop there. Okay, so let's go to the next page. Okay, I've already said, let's go to the next one. Okay, so in Texas, tax rate is defined in 3 steps. The first one is your current tax rate. That's the tax rate that you currently have, and that is 74.98 cents per hundred. It's been that way for, I forget the exact number, for several years now. It's been at that rate. The effective rate is the rate it takes you to bring in the same amount of money in fiscal 18 that you brought in fiscal 17. So because the appraisals went up and new growth came into the city, if we set our tax rate at 70.27 cents, it would bring in the same amount of money in fiscal 18 that we received in fiscal 17. And then there's the rollback rate, because Texas state law says if property values go up a certain amount, then they can be rolled back. So, and they calculate what that rate is. It's a little more complicated in Killeen because 0.5% of our sales tax is committed to reducing property tax. So once you apply the sales tax reduction to the property values, our rollback rate is 72.23 cents. Now, if we didn't have the sales tax provision in there, our rollback rate, if I recall, would be about 80 what? So if we did not have that sales tax provision, our rollback rate would be 85 cents. But because we have that, it changes the calculation, and our rollback rate is 72 cents.
Mayor.
Oh, there it is there. Right
Mr.
at the bottom,
Johnson.
85 cents.
To save a lot of time and trouble, last year I was beat up pretty bad, as were other council members. Can we put together a 3 or 4 slide PowerPoint presentation and put it on the city's website to explain to the taxpayers the difference between the current and effective rate? Because we had a load of taxpayers come in during the budget hearing, even though we did not change the tax rate. And John Locke, he did what he could, but I think if we can better prepare for that this year, those public hearings will go.
That's a great suggestion. And part of the reason that happens is because the state law requires us to use certain language when we advertise for the hearing, and that language gives the absolute appearance as if we're raising the tax rate. Because we leave the tax rate the same, we're bringing in more money than we did last year, the state requires us to say that's a tax increase. And it's deceptive. People do not understand that. So we'll have the explanation. I don't think it's going to necessarily stop people from coming in because of the way we have to advertise the hearing. But we will explain it, and we'll explain it as clearly as we possibly can.
Mr. Oker, you had a question?
Yeah, we did in fact bring in more revenue on the tax rate for this FY. Was it to the tune? I forget what it was, but it was it remained constant. But because of the property valuation, which it went up what 6%?
Yeah, almost 6%. Yeah.
6% this year. So will we? So we will make money. The city will make money, even if it stays constant. If current rate stays constant.
Yeah, about $2 million more than last year.
Yeah.
Let me be real clear, lest anybody make a mistake about this. Our cost of doing business
So,
and the tax exemptions are going up much faster than our money is coming in. And we are not keeping up with it. Okay. All right, having said that, let's go to the next slide. This is how I'm proposing that we use the property tax next year, and how it compares to 17. Last year we had 44.67 cents on our operations. We had 30.31 cents on our debt. For fiscal 18, I am proposing that we have 46.58 cents go to operations, 25.65 go to debt. That's a mathematical change. It's not because we had debt come off or anything like that. It's just the mathematics of the numbers. And I'm proposing that we put 2.75 cents into a capital fund and start funding our capital projects. That meets the city council's stated priorities, and it meets the objective that I think we clearly need to have. Now, there's also a practical reason for making that recommendation, because that 2.75 cents is the rollback amount. If we adopt the budget and someone goes out and gets a petition to have an election to roll back, And if that election is successful, if it were all in operations, it would throw the city into chaos. So by putting it into capital, it would be a loss for us. We would not be able to start our capital program, but it would not throw the city's operations into chaos. So I think that this is a prudent way to propose using the budget. Let's go to the next one. Now we're going to start looking at the expense side of the budget. And in the general fund, you can see that the personnel costs in the general fund are heavy. They are heavier than any other fund. So we've got about 77% of our general fund budget goes to support people. The general fund is heavily oriented towards service. And that should be pretty natural to see when you look at police and fire. Police and fire carry about 65% or so of the budget, and they are almost entirely people-oriented departments. And then, can't see the numbers from here, about 19% in materials and supplies and so forth. Let's go to the next page. The next page summarizes the actual numbers, departmental totals in the general fund. So down the left-hand side, in order of size, not alphabetically, but by order of size, you've got the list of departments in the general fund. First column is the actual expended there in 2016. Second column is the amount of budget that was adopted in 2017. The next column is the estimated actual for 2017, and then the proposed budget for fiscal 18 on the right-hand side. And again, down at the bottom, you see that balance, that $82 million of expenditure balances with the $82 million of projected revenue. Let's go to the next page. This is the impact on the general fund's fund balance. We start the year with 17.6 million. We bring in 82 million. We spend 82 million. We project ending the year with 17.6 million, and that will be 22.4% of fund balance, and that is just barely inside of our fund balance policy. Let's go to the next page. Now, because people are such a large portion of our budget, especially in the general fund, we're going to summarize the personnel for the general fund. So you can see in fiscal 16, we had 993 employees in the general fund. In fiscal 17, that went down to 276. It looks like in actuality, we'll finish with 966. And for fiscal 18, we are proposing 903. Let's go to the next page. This page summarizes the changes in the staffing by department. I'll take just a moment for you to look at that. The right-hand column nets the difference between 17 and 18, and you can see that we're going down almost 45 positions in the general fund. Let's go to the next page. I think this is important for the City Council to understand, because I know you're sensitive to it, as am I, and that is of those nearly 45 positions, and they're fractions because we look at full-time equivalents. We are funding some positions through part of the year, and these are accurate numbers for the year, but if you see a .66 there, that represents one person that will be unfunded out of the budget. It just means we're funding that position for part of the year. So you can see the net there. Of the 45 positions that will be reduced in the general fund, almost 41 of them are currently vacant. And About 4 of them are currently occupied. And those that are occupied, we will fund through January of this year. January of next year. And that will give, assuming the council adopts the budget as proposed, that will give those people a chance to transition their employment, either inside the city or outside the city. Let's go to the next. So what this one is our long-term projection. We have created a model that says if we keep things going exactly the way they're going right now in this proposed budget, what does the future look like? Now, keep in mind, this does not take into account that we have an issue with our retirement, we have an issue with our street maintenance, and all of the other issues we talked about that we said we have not addressed. So this does not take those issues into account. It just takes current conditions and says if we roll them forward into the future, we have a certain amount of population growth, we have inflation to consider, we have a current staffing model that we project into the future. So if we have 1.8 police officers per 1,000 population, we want to maintain that rate going into the future. If we have a certain number of parks employees per 1,000, we want to maintain that ratio going into the future. So those are the kinds of things this model takes into account. And what you see is, as we go forward in time, the gap between revenues and expenditures keeps getting bigger. Now that represents our challenge. We have got to figure out how to manage that gap. And obviously we do that in a couple of ways, or combinations of ways. You know, we can get more efficient with what we're doing and reduce our employee ratios. We can reduce the number of people otherwise. We can increase the amount of revenue we bring in, or combinations of all that. We can stop doing some services. There are options that we have to close that gap, but that's our challenge going into the future. How do we close that gap? And you'll see as we go through other funds over the next several days, this is the worst fund that we have. The rest of them, they look good going into the future. This one is a challenge.
The CIP with this, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Rivera.
With the CIP, we help on this issue?
I'm sorry?
With the CIP program, we help on this issue?
Not necessarily, because the way we're creating a capital fund right now. I think it will help a little bit. I need to back up.
Okay.
I
just
think it
wondered.
will. It
Just-
will
just-
help a
just
little
went
bit.
through
It won't fix it entirely, but it will help.
We help?
Yeah.
Okay, especially those, I was thinking more also in terms that we have so many new roads, new street that just got built, and we keep on building those. And 5 to 6 years from now, if we don't have a capital to take care of those streets, we're gonna have a big problem in our hand, because all that budget is gonna be in one time. Of course, everything is being built in one time, so everything's gonna have to be fixed in one time, most of it.
Streets are a particular problem, because if you looked at there's an engineering name for it that I don't understand, but if you looked at a graph of the average life of a street, it goes out fairly level for quite a few years.
About 6 or 7
Well,
years?
probably close to 15 years.
Okay.
And then it starts to go down, and it turns the bend and it comes down, and then it drops off really steep. So your streets are good for quite a while, and then when they start to fall apart, they fall apart really fast.
And the reason I say this is because we had a meeting with TxDOT, and they told us that we need to get ready to fix street within 6 to 7 years after they are open.
Yeah.
So,
About 7 years after they're put in service, you need to start doing seal coats and things like that on them as routine maintenance. If you
Okay.
don't do that, you hit that curve out there
Right,
faster, and
right.
it drops off much faster.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Can I just follow up? Because I think, I asked you this before, but my question was, you know, how we mentioned that every year during the budget, we take about 750,000 of that and set it aside for our infrastructure. So by establishing a CIP fund, are we still going to take that out, or is that going to save us 750?
It's not going to save us 750 because the CIP fund, the CIP fund is for new construction. It's not for maintenance.
May I finish with this then?
Go ahead.
I believe, it's my belief, that it's time for us to start educating the citizen that there will be some increase in their taxes and fees coming up if we want to see this outcome. Because this is not going to happen overnight without any money. And you just said it, the expenses are more quicker than the revenue. And I believe those services need to be provided. We need to start educating our citizens by now instead of wait to the last minute.
Mr. Harris?
And you said about the roads taking 15 to 16 years. I mean, we have different grades of roads, right? So can we assume that we're going to start trying to fund roads that have a 15-year lifespan, or are we going to continue with the 5 to 6 year lifespan as we're doing right now?
Well, you know, I think what we need to do is have a discussion outside of the budget about our streets and how we're managing and what our policies are for streets. One of the solutions, one of the things that will help here is to make sure we have ordinances and policies that require us to build a street to a higher lifespan. If you allow a street to be built to a 5-year lifespan, it's going to put a bigger burden on the taxpayer. If you require that street to be built for a 30-year lifespan, it's going to help. I don't know where we're at. I have not gotten into that part of what our policies and ordinances require. That's something we need to do.
Mr. Johnson, you had a question?
3 things: economic development, unfunded mandates. I think we need to take the gloves off from the folks in Austin. I'm tired of them sending down these unfunded mandates. And 3, if we talk about infrastructure, look at these city owner agreements. Look at the CIP projects that we have come through, and then we have 100 change orders coming after. Look at the things we have going on with Stagecoach, to where we're not holding these contractors accountable. There's millions of dollars in hard-earned taxpayer dollars, and it's going down the drain. That includes the roads downtown.
Mr. Okray?
Yeah. So you said, Mr. Olson, that CIP is just for new roads, right?
Yes.
So what are we going to do about the existing roads?
Well, there's a capital improvements plan, and then we need a capital maintenance plan. We need to do both of those things, and they're the same thing in terms of their capital, but the funding sources should be separate and different. And it isn't just roads. We do business out of 48 buildings. Most of them are older buildings. They are going to need roofs. They're going to need HVAC systems. We should be looking ahead for taking care of that. And right now, we don't have a capital maintenance plan.
So with this capital we're talking about, this .0275,
You are going to find when we get into the actual capital plan and look at what our needs are, that is going to be a drop in the bucket.
right?
But it's the first drop in the bucket. I mean, I don't want to minimize it. It's an important step, I think, to take. But when you look at the total scope of what we need, it's not going to come close.
So what's going to come close? Because you're talking about a population. You're talking about what, I heard $2 to $4 million that you lose in valuation just from people like me that get a benefit from that. So where is the money going to come from? We got you didn't tell us where the money tree was, did you?
I don't know the answer to the question yet. I don't know.
Because I don't know where it's going to come from. If it's not taxes, where's the money going to come from? If it's not taxes, where is the money going to come from? We got a print machine somewhere we're not
Well, if we do, I'm not going to run it because I don't want to go to jail.
I'm not either.
Because it's not gonna come out of the sky.
Yeah.
And you're talking about a population that's gonna continue to grow as far as, what they're talking about, Purple Heart recipients, now you're talking about first responders, that's being considered. And that's great if they do that. So where is the money gonna come from with the taxes?
Well,
I'm gonna tell you where it's gonna come from. It's gonna come from impact fees. That's where it's gonna come from. It's gonna come from transportation utility fees. That's where the money's gonna come from. Because I don't know, outside of that, I don't know where it's gonna come from.
I do.
You got a Fort Knox somewhere?
I do think one, in relation to the things you're mentioning, I do think that we need to make our position better known at the state legislature and try to get them to have all of the people of the state of Texas pay for these veterans benefits instead of select cities. That burden or blessing, however you want to look at it, needs to be spread over more people. And, you know, so that's another area that could make a difference if we could get their attention.
And you kind of mentioned the improvements and the maintenance, but the improvements is for like new roads, right? But I think the big thing is maintenance, because a lot of times when we do new roads, we do get a lot of state, federal funding, you know. But the maintenance is where we're at pretty much on our own, you know, and that's the big thing that's coming. That's our big challenge is, as I keep saying, all our older infrastructure, especially the north side, that's falling apart. But there's really no other funding than, you know, figuring out a way for the city to raise that money, because, you know, you don't get a lot of grants for that. You do get grants for new roads like Rosewood and all that. We got money for that. But for maintenance is the big issue that we have to tackle.
The challenges of this, you know, myself and the staff have worked extraordinarily hard to present an understandable, balanced budget. I've tried to be really clear about what we've accomplished in the budget and what we have not been able to accomplish in the budget. And right at this very moment, I'm feeling just a little bit depressed about the things we can't do. So it's a challenge.
Mr. Okray.
I'm just looking at this 0.275% that we're talking about with capital improvement. And you're talking about splitting it 8 different ways or 3 different ways or whatnot. And we're gonna get, how are we gonna maintain the north side, the south side, east and the west? How are we gonna get these roads? You're talking about $750,000. Now, we're talking about, in 17 million, you're talking about something ballooning to 40 million, but we're just gonna wait till we get there? That's the stupidest thing I've heard. That's stupid to think, and I'm not gonna be the one, I'm not in no way implying raising no taxes, but I would be better off to looking at a fee where I can go in the ordinance and fix where that money goes, like a restricted fund. Because you talking about taxes, and I don't think anybody around this table is willing to say, hey, I'll raise your taxes. I don't think nobody, because I'm not willing to do it. So where is my question on this is, where is the money gonna come from? It's not gonna drop out the sky. I'm maybe facetious talking about Fort Knox and the printing machine and whatnot, but we're talking realistically, how are we gonna maintain the infrastructure? And I'm just only talking about roads. I'm talking roofs, talking about sewage, particularly on this side of the town, that still got clay pipes up in it. And that is an infrastructure. So how do we maintain it? That's something I don't think we can wait. I'm gone, Nick. I'm out of here next year. But I don't think we have the luxury of time to sit here and say, we're not going to do. I'm not for raising no taxes, but a fee over a period of time to at least generate the, 13 million on one and 25 to 27 million on the other, that sounds like a more plausible idea.
Yeah, and I think maybe the way to approach that is as we work our way through the budget, at some point, the council, I don't know that you can make that big decision inside of this budget decision. I mean, I think that's too big of a decision to make with all of the other things that are included in adopting a budget. But it doesn't mean you can't come back right after this and have a policy discussion and make a decision about where you want to go with it.
And that's what I'm saying. We talk about policy, and I know we would have to do this outside of this, but what's knocking me upside my head is so much development has went on. So much has went on, and it was, you know what, streets, utilities, fresh water, all this stuff was not germane to any decision, not a one. And we went down the road, hey, let's go get a bond for that. We'll do it that way. We can't do it that way anymore. And I think that's a discussion we really need. If we talk about anything, what we sit around this table and supposed to be doing, out of everything else, that is essential. Running water, sewage.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's continue on.
Can I suggest we take a break?
How much more you got left?
That finishes my summary of the general fund, and where we go from here is starting in department by department, going through the general fund. So it's a great time to take 5-minute
All
break
right.
if that's what you want to do.
Take a break.
He's been talking for 2 hours. He needs to go.
I didn't know it was so bad.
Ready. Hillary.
I think you're up, Ms. Davis.
See you a minute.
Mayor,
Yes, please. Oh, he's got some. I just love you guys.
So I think the mayor just gave us the go-ahead to get started. Let me give a quick introduction of what we're going to do next. I've given the summary of what's happening in the general fund, and now what we're going to do is go through department by department alphabetically and have each department head tell you about their budget. And that's the pattern that I intend to use all the way through. So when we finish the general fund, we'll do the same thing with the water and sewer fund and every other fund. So this is going to take, it's going to take several days of hard work to get through all of this. This is kind of the first time for me doing this with you all. And I mean, I would understand if you said we don't want to do that. We just want to go through the summaries. But I think because it's the first time this year, I think we ought to go through all of that. That's my recommendation to you. And it'll take the time it takes to do it. Now, next year, you may not want to go into that much detail. I'll leave that up to you, and we can talk about that. But I do recommend we do it for this year. And if that's okay with you, Mayor, Ms. Davis is up first.
All right. Everybody okay with that, or we just want summaries?
Ready to go?
Ready to go?
We ready to go?
Huh? Yes, what?
We ready to go?
You okay with
Take 2 Advil and drive on.
summaries? Everybody's good with summaries, or you said detail?
Ready to go.
Ready to go. Let's do it.
All right, ready to go. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm here to talk to you about the City Attorney's Office, which is comprised of 2 divisions, the City Attorney's Division and the City Secretary's Division. The mission of the City Attorney's Office is to advance, support, and defend the city's interests by providing efficient and effective legal services to the City of Killeen. The mission elements that support that mission statement are to provide ongoing advice to city officials, to prepare and review legal documents, to process public information requests and appeals to the Attorney General, to prosecute persons accused of violating state laws and city ordinances, to process claims, to conduct election of city officials, to take minutes at council meetings, and record retention. The mission elements are supported by one or more performance measures. Providing ongoing advice to city officials is supported by time spent providing legal advice. Preparing and reviewing legal documents, we look at time spent preparing and reviewing those documents. And on those two, we're doing those a little bit differently. In years past, we've always looked at pure numbers of consultations that we've provided, numbers of documents that we've reviewed or prepared, and we decided that that's really not a very realistic look of how much time we're spending doing those things, because in our tick marks, a document that's just one page that takes a few minutes to review gets the same amount of presence on the page as a document that may have taken us a week and multiple hours to review and prepare. So rather than just tallying documents that we prepare and review, or times or that we have spent speaking with either staff members or council members, we've looked at the amount of our time that we spend in these activities. This is new to us. We've only had about 4 months of tracking in this manner, but so far it shows that we're spending about 17% of the attorney's time providing legal advice to city officials and staff members, and about 23% of our time reviewing and preparing documents. So as we go along through the process, I think we should be able to refine those numbers. For processing public information requests, we look at the number of information requests received, and we're estimating, based upon 9 months of data, that we will receive just over 3,000 requests throughout this budget year. And we will send about 516 appeals to the Attorney General, and 99% of our requests are responded to within 10 days. If we are giving out documents without sending it to the AG, we get the amount of time that's reasonable, and we have had some very lengthy and time-consuming requests that have taken us just over 10 days to fulfill, but those are very rare. We do have a 100% conviction rate on all cases tried in the municipal court. We have to date, or we estimate through the end of this year, that we will have 110 claims filed by the city against other people to collect on damages to city property, and 70 claims filed against the city by other people seeking restitution for damages to their property. We have conducted one election of city officials. We estimate 25 sets of minutes will be taken, one shredding day will be completed, and one record retention citywide training provided in this budget year. Our goals for the upcoming fiscal year include researching and responding to the city's franchise needs, reviewing and revising court documents as necessary, revising and updates the city's standard engineering and construction contracts, reviewing and drafting ordinances supporting the city's goals for future development, providing support for updating the city's comprehensive plan and implementation of a strategic growth plan, and to facilitate the review and revision of council's rules of protocol and procedure, to assist with the creation of city council policies, and to create and distribute regular training bulletins to the police department. How the city attorney's department fits into the enterprise. From a staffing perspective, our department consists of 0.89% of full-time employees in the general fund and 0.62% of full-time employees in the total enterprise. From a budget perspective, our department consists of 1.19% of the expenses in the general fund and just over 0.5% of the expenses in the entire enterprise. So we're starting with one of the big departments, getting you into this process. Staffing chart, you can see that we currently have 8 budgeted and filled positions, and we will have 8 proposed positions in the upcoming budget year. Our revenue budget. You can see that we do bring in a small amount of revenue. It's not a lot, and that it mostly consists of liquor and beer and wine permits that the city secretary issues, and some smaller permits such as taxi, shuttle, limo, parade, assembly permits, those types of smaller permits. And you will see that there is a variance from year to year, and that consists mostly of when establishments' liquor permits come due. The liquor permits are the most expensive permit that we issue, and in the years that we issue more of those permits, it will show an increase in revenue for that year, and that explains the variance in the revenue from year to year. And that's what I just explained. All right. our expense budget. You can see there that the vast majority of the expenses, just under 93% actually of our budget consists of salary and benefits. And then outside of that, we have a small portion that is related to materials and supplies and our contracts. And the vast majority of that, just about half of that, is actually our election expense. So you can see that the largest part by far is salary and benefits, and then elections is our biggest expense that we take care of every year. You will see also on the previous slide that our proposed budget does show a decrease, as all of the departments will. And how we accounted for that decrease originally was to reduce funding for legal services. Legal services account is the one that we use to pay for legal specialists when we need to hire legal specialists, and also to pay for litigation when we do have litigation expenses that come up that are not covered by TML. That's the fund that we would pay for those specialized legal services from. We also eliminated all training and travel for staff. And this training and travel is really to meet the continuing legal education requirements of the 5 attorneys on staff. We are required to get a minimum of 15 hours every year. We were able to work ahead this year and get enough training where most of it could transfer over to next year if necessary. We were able to meet that to a certain extent. That was our goal. And so we were going to eliminate training and travel and try to find some other maybe free training to close that gap for next year. And we also proposed eliminating the annual membership fees for Encore and the ATMOS steering committees. That's the groups that we are a part of who will review and analyze the rate increase requests for Encore and ATMOS. And that was a fee that we weren't going to be able to initially find the money to pay for under our cap. So we did have some decision packages for the city manager, and 3 of them were approved. The first one being funding our legal services account in full, and that was an amount of $22,000, which has initially been approved by the city manager, and to fund the annual fees for the Encore and ATMOS steering committees, and that has been initially funded for $23,000, which would cover the fees for both of those. And also, he has initially funded our travel and training necessity for the city attorneys, all 5 of us, in order that would cover 1 training session per attorney in an area that's relevant to the areas in which we provide services. We did have 1 decision package that was disapproved. This was the year that we were interested in putting together a comprehensive training session for the boards and commission members. We've never been able to do that. That was going to take some facilities money as well as some supplies money that we did not have in our budget, and that was not able to be funded for this year, so that one was disapproved. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and the city manager as well may have some comments.
Mr. Okry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As far as this decision package that was disapproved, which is the boards and commissions training, is there any way Texas Municipal League can help us maybe do stuff by virtual training where you log in or sign up?
Boards and commissions isn't really anything that TML looks at, but we're looking at ways right now to still be able to do a training session for the boards and commissions, but at a reduced level. That is something that we are already planning to do. We want to come up with a comprehensive document that would apply to all boards and commissions. So at a minimum, we will do that. We will come up with some standard rules and procedures for all boards and commissions and provide those to all members. And also, we will be providing training for the various department liaisons, so that way they will be able to help their boards and commissions with any questions that may come up. So we're not going to leave them out in the cold. We will do something for them this year. It may not be to the extent that we had hoped, but we will do some more comprehensive training for boards.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? All right, Mr. Olson.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, as we've as we go through the budget, there will be probably some comments I will make after some of these presentations. On the city attorney's budget, would just like to point out that some of the departments over the years have been reduced repeatedly, year after year. They get squeezed down a little bit more each year. Some of them have hit the end of they've hit the wall. If we reduce them any further, they're not going to be functional. And this is one of those. If we're going to meet the core mission of the city attorney's office, I couldn't not approve the decision packages. It would be impossible, for example, to not have money there for outside attorneys and for litigation. Something's going to happen through the year. We're going to need to spend that money. To not train our attorneys it's not a good decision. So this is one of the departments that has been reduced over the years down to what I think is the absolute base level, and it just simply shouldn't be reduced any further.
I have a real quick question. I know that as a city, we get sued a lot. Can the city sue?
We can, and we have, very rarely, thankfully, but when we are the ones that is pursuing the litigation,
Yeah.
that is not covered by TML, and those are costs that we have to bear ourselves.
Because maybe that's another area where we need to look at revenue. Sue.
I have one question for Ms. Davis.
Let's hope we're not put in that position to have to sue someone.
I just
Mrs.
have one
Fleming.
question. I saw when you were flipping over the things. You all need extensive training, and I can't see how you all get that with just $7,000. I just can't see it. With all the things you all need to know, and each year you have to upgrade your knowledge, that's just not enough money. I'm serious, like Mr. Olson was saying, you're squeezing your budget now, and you can't squeeze you guys anymore because it's not fair to you all.
I think right now we're lucky because working in Texas and we have really good training that's provided through Texas Municipal League. The
Right.
Texas City Attorneys Association provides excellent, very affordable training every year, and the Texas Municipal Courts Education Center also provides really good economical training for the court. So we're able to get relevant training that's very helpful at an affordable rate. So we really can get the training that we need with that
I know
$7,000.
TML has wonderful training.
They do.
So
It's a great
I'm
resource.
hoping you all get all you need.
We
because
do.
it's a vital thing that you all need.
Thank you for asking
You're doing
that.
a good job, Ms. Davis.
Thank you. Appreciate
Yeah, and I just want to say that, you said about 90% it's manpower but the city attorney's office is one example of it is the manpower we need. You can't replace that with anything because you're there for the brains, nothing else. You're not there. You're just there for the knowledge. And so it's one of those departments that sometimes it's hard to gauge because it's like, what are we spending but on personnel? That's it.
Exactly. That and election expenses. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis.
Okay, another brains of the operation here.
Tried to delegate this to one of my staff, but I don't have any.
You don't have no staff. Shame on you.
All right. I am the city auditor, and this is my department. I guess they want me to make an introduction. So, I didn't write about wanting to become an auditor when I was, 5 years old, doing essays. But I love the function. It's great. You can audit anything. Saw History Channel, something about a battle between the Spanish Armada and the English. And they found these detailed logs in the Spanish galleon of cannonball, of number of cannonballs used and how long it took to load them. Kind of explain why they lost the battle. But it just shows you can quantify and qualify any kind of activity, and that's it wasn't my I was going to be a Hollywood director out of high school, but on my way to UCLA, but here I am here. And I like the job, love the job being here, and I love this function. It's my job, in a nice way, to hold Mr. Olson's feet to the fire, and in terms of all the stuff he's been talking about tonight, which is all very, very good stuff, in terms of the policies and the streets, the things being brought up here today, impact fees, equitable access. There was a night here with the parks. Nice presentation by Brett, and there were folks in the back of the room, and it was just really, it really struck me because they felt like nobody heard them. It was talking, about access to parks and recreations, and so even that's the kind of stuff even audit can look at. So it's kind of like a professional nag, but your job is to just keep peppering until people get tired of hearing you, and then hopefully things get done. But that's my spiel. And my mission is, the city auditor's department's mission is to provide independent analyses of city programs and activities to ensure a properly functioning system of internal controls, promote efficiency and effectiveness in city operations, and enhance transparency of the government. Oh, there it is. And mission elements are to create audit plans, to conduct audits, and to issue reports. And this year, currently in progress, is my audit of the P-card program that I'm wrapping up. Should be issuing. It may get lost in the, or it may be issued in the wake of the management audit, but so it may not make as big a splash. But it should be issued around that time. And the goals for 17-18, as part of my plan, is the something that Mr. Olson talked about, the planning and funding process for vehicle replacement. Or I think it was a bigger scope than that. You were talking about other assets, but the city's policies governing the authorization and use of compensatory time, police department state seizure fund. That one I'm going to hand over to finance to take care of, and KCC liquor operation. And I am, 0.11% FTEs. I've done about as much as I can do to reduce myself.
Oh my gosh.
Short of taking off limbs, this is and 0.08% FTEs of the enterprise. And the enterprise-wide, 0.12% of expenses of the general fund, and 0.05% of expenses, 0.12% of expenses in the fund, of the expenses in general, and 0.05 enterprise-wide. And that's about it. 111. Maybe at some future date, and when if resources allow, then maybe we might be able to staff up. But but I recognize that's going to be a while. And this is revenue. Well, it's not revenue I'm bringing in. This is the revenue from the general fund for the city auditor. And ditto for the expenses. Which I have tried to keep to a minimum. There are certain things I need to keep up in terms of continuing professional education. So the materials and supplies are mainly for for attending training and continuing maintaining membership in certain organizations, the Association of Local Government Auditors and the Internal Auditors, Institute of Internal Auditors. And the decrease since I'm coming in, Amanda was here for a while. Since I came in at the big lower end of the pay grade, they got me at a bargain. So that's which I'm happy to provide. And no, it's not. It would not be in good. It would be in bad conscience for the seat auditor to be asking for things that affect the budget during this time. So I deferred.
All right, any questions for our city auditor? All right, Mr. Okrie, you got a question?
Yes.
Matt?
Mr. Grady, you seem to be working on you're a one-man gang. So is it in the absence of a person? I mean, I know you showed the plan, your yearly plan. I know it's a pretty lengthy process. I know it, just looking at it, I don't know what it's all entail. But are you finding like automated or software to kind of do, was it AI replacements on things?
Yeah, there is ACL is a software. It's a little pricey, so it's kind of out of budget right now. But it was certainly something like that would definitely save time, especially when you're dealing with programs with a lot of data that needs to be massaged and analyzed. So that's something that would help. Short of staff, something like that would definitely help down the road. And I think it's about $1,700 a year for a license.
So how much was it?
About $1,700.
$1,700. That's better than paying salary
Oh yeah.
in retirement. Thank you.
Mrs. Fleming.
I just have one question, Matt. I didn't see in your figures up there that you put that you have to use some glue to pull your hair out after all the city councils wear you every day. So, because we do bother you a lot and get information from you, and I want to say thank you for all the times I call you and email you for specifics, and you get right on it and things like that, because I do call you a lot and wanting information. So I know that wasn't up there, so you need to maybe go somewhere to rest after we get done with you, because I know we do bother you a lot. But I want to thank you for putting up with me. I can't speak for everybody else, but I know I do bother you a lot. Thank you, sir.
Well, you're welcome.
All right, anybody else? All right, thank you, Matt.
City manager's budget is up next, and I asked Mr. Baldwin to present that to the city council.
Mr. Baldwin.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, City Manager.
I think we're all getting used to calling you Mr. instead of Chief.
As a cop, I've been called a lot of things, so I don't think it's going to bother me. Mr. sounds like I was in 6th grade again, though. Okay, the mission of the City Manager's office is to build a high-performing organization to support a highly effective council. The mission elements that fall within that mission is to provide leadership to the organization, advise the City Council, manage city operations, and conduct stakeholder engagement and externally represent the city. Some of the goals that you'll see in the next 2 slides have already been spoken of by the City Manager, but I'll go ahead and give you a comprehensive list that he has set forward for fiscal year 17 and 18. First one is delivered a balanced budget, fiscal year 18-19. Budget for we're talking about next fiscal year. So while we're in it, he's looking at ensuring that the fiscal year 18-19 budget is also balanced and delivered to you in that manner. Begin developing a new comprehensive plan that includes management goals, create a capital projects plan, create a plan to centralize the purchasing process, make a plan to reduce the number of P-card users and transactions, create and begin to execute a communications plan, including a new website, assist the city council to fulfill its policy-making role. Next slide is create a plan to address deficiencies of the TMRS contributions, create a plan to address the deficiencies of the classification system, make a plan to evaluate and possibly implement a self-funded health insurance program, make a plan to address risk management issues, create a comprehensive IT plan, and ready the Emergency Operations Center, train key personnel, and prepare an all-hazards manual. The next slide is how the city manager's office fits into the enterprise from a staffing standpoint. 3.34 full-time equivalents, which makes up 0.37% of the full-time equivalents in the general fund, and it equates to 0.26 FTEs throughout the enterprise. Bottom left-hand corner, you'll see the general fund full-time equivalents at 903.73, and all funds FTEs are 1282.08. How the city manager's office fits in the enterprise from a budgetary standpoint shows its budget amounts to just under 1% at 0.89% of the general fund. And that general fund total for this fiscal year is coming up, it'd be $82,128,036. From an enterprise standpoint, the city manager's office makes up 0.41% of the enterprise as a whole, which is total of $180,214,576, excuse me. From a staffing standpoint, FTEs budgeted 15-16, there were 6. Budgeted 16-17, there were 4. Proposed for fiscal year 17-18, this budget is 3.34. From a revenue standpoint, the next slide shows that the general fund provides the funding source for the city manager's office. You'll see at 15-16, the actual was $757.33. It fluctuated from the adopted and estimated actual for 16-17 a little bit, but this proposed budget's coming in at $735,026. The expense slide, you'll see the same totals along the base of that, but it gets down into what aspects of the fund, of those expenses pertain to personnel services, materials and supplies, contracts, and capital outlay. Of course, there's nothing for capital outlay. The explanation for the expense variance is unfilled administrative assistant position. The next slide is the decision packages approved by the city manager. And the next slide behind that is decision packages disapproved by the city manager. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Okray.
Back on the goals for FY 17-18, says he's gonna, and maybe we're gonna get that later on, but it talks about make a plan to evaluate and possibly implement a self-funded health insurance program. How is it gonna work in coordination with ACA?
Affordable Care Act.
I can only tell you how we've done it in the past and how I've done it in the past. And when you create your plan document to do your own self-funded, the administrator that helps you put that plan document into effect completely incorporates the Affordable Care Act into their plan document. So it's embedded in there, and every part of it is taken into consideration when you make those decisions.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Nope. Next. Ms. Shine, PR.
So I've been divided into four separate presentations this year, but 3 of them are embedded in the general fund, so I'll take you through those. The first is communications, which is formerly public information. We are going through a title change because we do more than just public information, and there's some confusion about us fulfilling public information requests. So industry-wide, they're being called communications, and so we are making that transition. Our mission is basically just to promote information for a well-informed public. Page. Our mission elements are disseminating information to external audiences, disseminating information to internal audiences, and supporting media relations. And then by the numbers, there we go. You can see here that we have the website, Facebook page, we produce city council meetings, program videos, city insight, mayoral correspondence, mayor. We've done 100 pieces for you this year so far. And as well as doing internal information, which would include City Beat, employee awards, and a number of other things that we do. We've already exceeded our Facebook fans numbers. These numbers tick up over time, and so we're having a really good year there. Our goals for next year, you'll see some similarities between some of the city manager's priorities and our presentation. So we're going to be implementing a strategic communications plan. We want to substantially complete KilleenTexas.gov. That's our website. It needs to be completely reconfigured, rebuilt from the ground up. We are in the process of installing or working towards a plan to install broadcasting and web streaming equipment for city council workshops. This is a temporary measure just so that we can get the budget meetings on camera, and then if we are to undertake renovations at city council chambers, then we'll probably have to move over here for some period of time, and we'll do a little bit more permanent solution that will allow web streaming. That's the one deficiency in this plan. And then also we've gotten to the point where we need to install some sort of tracking system so we can really show all of the things that we do. We get our hands in a lot of stuff, but don't necessarily record all of those things. We just try to be part of planning for other people's functions. You can see my tiny little sliver here. That's communications. We have 4.9 people, and I'll explain the 0.9. That's me. I have divided myself, Matt, so that's a challenge to you, and how we fit into the enterprise. Then we get into the general fund, and again, little bitty slivers here in the overall expenditures. The full-time employees, here is the difference. So we had 5 employees in 15-16, 5 in 16-17, and then 4.9 next year, because 0.1 of me is now going to be captured in the Legislative Affairs Fund. So you'll see that in just a moment. This takes us into our revenue budget. We are supported by the general fund, and you will see a difference here, and I'll explain it to you here on the next page. We were funding some positions out of a different fund, and they've all been transferred into this fund for this year. So that explains the growth there in that final number, and then you'll see down here, we'll talk in just a moment about what that decision package is. So then in our expenditures budget, again, we're people heavy also. Writing takes people. And so that's a lot of what we do. We do have some materials and supplies related to operations of the government channel, and some contracts for things like the website, hosting, web council streaming, those types of things are captured under contracts. And then again, you see the decision package there, and I will get there in just a second. So we've transferred positions, and that explains the variance in the overall expenditures. There we go. And the redesign of the city's official website, which again, if you'll go back to the numbers I quoted in the very beginning, that's our busiest road. It gets 1 million hits a year. So you have to think about it, and I think about it as infrastructure, and it is desperately in need of rebuilding. And so this, we believe, is enough money. We'll have to go through a process and bring it back to you all for approval, obviously. But we believe that this will be sufficient for the redesign and implementation, as well as the first year of hosting expenses and technical support. Oh, and that is the other piece of it, is we intend to develop a mobile app that's compatible with the website and incorporates the many systems, work order systems and those things that we have, but basically putting City Hall in people's hands. Right now our website's not even mobile friendly. It was built in 2007. And so you can imagine how much technology has changed since then, not to mention ADA standards and all these other things we really need to keep up with, and security. We all know that we had an issue last year that cost us some downtime, and so we don't want to have security issues moving forward. We didn't have any requests that were disapproved, and that concludes communications. And we'll move on to legislative affairs, I think. Is that one next, Tom?
Mayor?
We have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I should have.
I had a
Mr. Rivera.
question, way back, a couple of years ago, or maybe more than a couple of years ago. You usually get a grant from, the cable company for broadcast. I think they were giving you $200,000.
That is, we'll talk about it in the special revenue funds.
Okay, so let
It's
me-
an additional 1% franchise fee that it's through a state franchise, and so it produces about $200,000 in
Let me
revenue a
wait.
year. Okay, so now we're on legislative affairs.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Oh, yes.
I know that part of the communication is, trying to create a positive outlook, and a lot of that is done through the internet, and I know website is important, but do we have somebody that kind of does everything else? Because an example, it's like when you search something, when I search something, usually the first thing that pops up where I receive information is like Wikipedia, and that kind of gives you the history of that. And I know that sites like that also need to be updated, because if you look on our Wikipedia, I think the thing that I always see there is our Luby's massacre and all this other negative stuff, and it's like,
Right.
man, we got a lot of great things happening in the city than other than that.
Those are always a little bit tricky. Right now, we have undertaken a big Google project, so when someone searches for, let's say, Killeen Community Center, the addresses aren't always correct, the hours aren't always correct, the websites aren't always correct. So we're going through systematically, going
Yeah.
through every one of our facilities, and so Wikipedia is also on that list. We just haven't attacked it yet. They're a little tricky because people who aren't you can make suggestions for edits, but we will. That's part of our plan moving forward, is to figure out what all of those pieces.
Yeah,
of
and
parts
that's why
are
I
and
mean,
try
I
to
think
get 'em in
having
line.
somebody that does that,
Yeah.
that's probably important.
Yes, Allison is the person who has been tasked with that chore, so she's working her way through bit by bit.
Oh, good luck to her.
Right.
That will be part of the comprehensive communication plan that we intend to do.
Yeah, all right. Continue on.
Okay, so legislative affairs, our mission is just to advocate the city's interests to state and federal legislators and agencies on your behalf. We assist the city council in developing legislative principles, which we did this year. We establish and maintain relationships with state and federal elected officials and agencies, and advocate the city's interests to state and federal legislators and agencies directly and through our lobbyists. For next year, we plan to develop not just a state legislative principles document, but also a federal legislative principles document. It's been a little while. We typically did them when we were going to visit our legislators in Washington. But I think it's important for us to get those documented and for you all to have approval of them so that we can provide them to those to the federal officials. We do, when the lobbyist was here, he was speaking about some interim charges that we're trying to get done. So the legislature only meets every 2 years. They're in special session now, obviously. But there's a lot of work that happens in the interim through committees. And so one of the requests that we've made is to do a full and comprehensive study on those veterans exemptions, so that they can see fully what the picture is statewide and hopefully compel the state to take some greater action to benefit communities like Killeen, if not all communities that are experiencing a disproportionate impact. So that is something that will continue on during this interim time. And then we need to strengthen our federal legislative efforts. We used to do a much stronger job of that, but with budget cuts, we have not been doing as much as we could. And so I think with the new city manager on board and his direction, I think we'll probably beef that up just a bit here in the not-so-distant future. You can't even see the sliver because it's just 1/10 of a person, so we'll just buzz right on through here. Okay, and so that's where you see, we've never actually allocated a person towards this particular fund, and so we've created this fund this year so that we can keep track of it a little bit more clearly. So in the revenue budget, we are mostly supported by the general fund, but there is some reimbursement. We participate in the Texas Mayors and Military Communities, and we are reimbursed by our fellow cities that are involved in our membership to the tune of $5,980 each year. So it's just a little bit of revenue towards it, but the rest of it comes from the general fund allocation. Here we have the expenditures, and you'll see the personnel is just salary and benefits for 1/10 of a person. And then you have materials and supplies, and that's mostly training and travel dollars for trips to Austin or wherever we need to go in support of our mission. And the contracts, you're aware of the $105,000 contract with Schluter Group, and then there's a $12,000 payment that we make to the mayors and military communities and get reimbursed for just a portion of that. The expense we've already talked about, and then there were no decision packages requested or approved or disapproved. So then that takes us to printing services, unless anyone has questions about that one.
Mr. Okray.
These legislative updates from Dean International, is that, who, are they associated with? the
Dean
Schluter Group?
International?
Yes.
Huh. No, somebody's put y'all on a list because I haven't been receiving those. Would you forward me one so I could do a little research?
Sure.
I'd appreciate that. TML should be, if you all are entered in the TML system, they also send legislative up. Okay, so you probably received those as well. So printing services? Okay, so when you looked at the overall funding in the budget, that when we were going through it earlier, you probably noticed that communications seemed to grow a lot. We assumed responsibility for printing services in November of last year when support services was eliminated. So printing services is one of the items that we'll go through tonight. And they produce all of our printed materials to support the mission of the organization. So their mission elements are printing materials used by the departments and coordinating and managing contracted printing. They have some metrics that they use. They do a little survey, and 99% satisfaction comes back from that, and that's always the case every year, it seems like. They've done 930 work orders and 4.2 million print impressions. It's a lot of printing, but if you think about every water bill that we print, every permit that we print, every letterhead, every business card, they do it all in-house. So there are very few projects that we have to outsource. I think there's only 2, and one of them is City Insight because of the quantity and it's printed in color. So a couple of big things are happening for the print shop. One of them is that they are going to be making a move to the CAC. So currently they're in lease space right around the corner from us, and that lease is $18,000 a year. That lease will go away. They are intended to be fully moved into the CAC, into space that we already own. It was the Civic Art Guild's space on the bottom floor. And so they're going to be making some renovations to that space in order to move into in advance of their lease expiring September 31st. And then they're new to my department. I said I've only had them since November, and so we're going to go through establishing some performance standards and implementing those so that we can assure the highest quality control of our products. There are 2 of them, and so you can see their little sliver. There were 3 positions due to budgetary cuts and efficiencies that I think we're going to be able to realize, and we had a vacancy occur, and so we are going to move into this fiscal year with just 2 positions, unfunding the position that existed before. There's no one in it currently. So then when you move to revenue, it's all general fund revenue. And then in expenditures, you see there's personnel, materials and supplies, and that's all sorts of things. So that's everything from paper to, all kinds of supplies that are required in printing. And then the contracts, there are quite a few of those. Those are the big copy machines. And so we do lease the large copy machines, and they provide maintenance on them so that we don't own them outright. But you will notice this capital outlay line, and that's $20,000. You'll have brought before you next month a 4-year contract to purchase a new printing press. Our printing press is in sad shape, and when you look at how much printing we do, it's really necessary for their operations. And so we'll be bringing that bid. It's actually out for bid right now, and we'll be bringing it before you in September.
How old is the older printing?
How old is it?
How old is the last one that you all had?
It's 1995. I think it's 95. I could be right. It could be 99, but I think it's that old. But if you think about the volume, we do 50,000 water bills a month, and if you
need a new one,
all the other stuff, it's gotten to where it has a lot of downtime, and we're paying a lot in repairs. So again, we'll be bringing more information on that soon. So I spoke to eliminating the unfunded position. We're getting rid of that building lease, which is great. And then there were some other decreases related to achieving our budgeting target. There are no proposed decision packages, so none were approved or disapproved. And that completes my little portion unless anyone has questions. But I will be back for PEG during
Mr.
special revenue.
Mr. Johnson?
I have a question that said, the revenue estimate is going down. I think I was outside, or maybe I missed it, but, this year it says 231. Next year is 185 for revenues. Is that?
Which one are you on? Communications or printing?
Yeah, printing,
Oh, printing.
page 126.
26.
Yes, so this year, they don't need as much money because we've eliminated that building lease and we've eliminated the position. So they won't be taking in as much money from the general fund because they cost less. That's the difference there.
All right, Mr. Okri.
Yes. Mr. City Manager, Mr. Olson, did I hear you say, because it was music to my ears, you say we was working on some digital replacements to the printing? I didn't hear it. Must have been dreaming then.
You were thinking it. You were probably thinking it, but I didn't say it.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, you had to be asleep to be dreaming, so I know.
All right. Anybody else? Mr. Kilpatrick?
The old printing press. We're gonna,
Attempt to sell.
attempt to sell it and bring a little bit more
Right.
revenue back.
Right.
Nothing else, take it to, bulk. It's gotta be cast metal.
Yes, it is a giant beast, and it's got to have some value, whether it is production, value for someone to be able to use it as a piece of equipment or some sort of metal value. So yeah, we're exploring what to do with that as soon as we can get a new one in the works. We'll figure out what to do with it.
Mr. Mayor, I have
Mrs.
a
Fleming.
question, maybe off the record, I don't know, Mr. Baldwin, you're sitting in his place now. City Council has a lot of projects and things outside. Is it feasible, I've asked this question before from someone, is it feasible for the City Council to print certain things that we may need to do city business? Say we have a town hall meeting and I need to print, say, 50 things to hold my town hall meeting. Is it possible that we could probably get some things printed without paying for them out of our own little $100 a month?
Well, all the departments pay for their printed goods.
They do?
They do. So I have, like, communications, the main budget has a printing budget, and so I pay for whatever I
We have a
use.
printing budget, but I don't think the council has a printing budget. So we might need to talk to Mr. Olson about that, because
Mr. Baldwin?
And, Ms. Fleming, that's exactly what we need to do. If we're going to look at something like that, we need to make sure it's for city business, of
Yes.
course, through
Sure.
legal, but it's something we can make a note of and try to program in future budgets
Thank you.
for your city council members.
Thank you, because
that's
we
something
can bring it
out-
and show you before we get it printed. We can send an email in to Judy and say, is this acceptable to be printed? Because I have a lot of things I pay for myself when
And
I have meetings.
and I'll get with the city manager on that as well, and we'll see what we can do. But again, as long as that vetting process is done to ensure everything's done properly, then, and if it can be budgeted in future budgets, then we'll be fine.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else? Mr.
Well,
Kilpatrick?
I'll tag on to that too, because we're all the districts are starting to develop, neighborhood watch programs. And, neighborhood watch signs, we're procuring them our own selves.
Well, I have to pay for my signs, Yeah,
That's what I'm saying,
sure,
each district is, we're paying, and that could be as many as 300 to 400 signs, if you're gonna do it properly by every neighborhood,
Absolutely.
entrances and exits.
And the notifications and things like that,
them
because I had to have man
put in
printed
there
out.
so that, we mark and identify this neighborhood as an active
It is,
neighborhood watch. Would,
growing thing.
it's not a big deal if I'm gonna spend 25, 30, 40 bucks to make some flyers out, to announce meetings and everything. But when you start coming up to
I had more than that printed. I had
$200 or
about
$300 worth of signs, that are gonna go in the neighborhood.
Just, Mr. Mayor,
All right.
Y'all business.
Yes, it does.
Yeah,
Mhm.
just be careful.
Mr. Rivera.
Just be careful with that. There's people in district and there's people at large. And this is a big city if you want to send out a flyer.
We'll take the large budgets too with us.
There you go. There you go,
Right.
Jim. Thank you.
I do Office Max, so I don't have to worry about, I get 50% off.
Absolutely. You get the
Thank you, Mr.
military
Mayor.
discount, don't you?
No, I just get 50% off. Just ask them.
Good, though. We can do that.
Get your Realtor card.
Yeah.
I got a Realtor card, I give you 50% off. Mrs. Inco, welcome.
Thank you. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about 5 of the 8 divisions that make up the Community Development Department. The other 3 are going to be in some special revenue that you'll hear later. But the first one that I'm going to talk about is just the administrative part of community development. And the mission of the admin department is to implement the Community Development Block Grant and the Home Program Grant. You'll see the mission elements are to provide oversight, reporting, and compliance for the CDBG program, and the same thing for the home program. There's lots of reporting required when you take federal dollars, and there's lots of compliance as well when you accept those federal dollars. Our performance measures you'll see there, we submit about 11 reports throughout the year. We've administered 17 grants successfully through the year, provided technical assistance to 18 persons, and provided community planning meetings for citizen participation 4 times. Our goals for next year are to maintain the CDBG and home program grant requirements, to complete all the grant reporting, and to complete the program monitoring of all of our subrecipients. We monitor all of the agencies that the council awards the funds to on a quarterly basis to make sure that they're meeting their scope of work, make sure that they are meeting their outcomes, and making an impact for what they've asked for. Okay, so how do we fit into the enterprise? You'll see we're a little blip on the screen there as well, 0.11% of the FTEs in the general fund and 0.08 in the enterprise. In the budget, you'll see 0.18% of the expenses in the fund and 0.08 in the city enterprise. Staffing, this looks a little odd. You'll see 15, 16, 16, 17 was 5 and 0.98 proposed in 17, 18. We are moving some of the admin folks, the cost of those folks, into the special revenue paid out of the grant. Our revenues, you'll see there, total 381,779, and decision packages, you'll see there with the additional revenue, and then decision packages from general fund for a total of 144,317 in revenue. Explanation of that is the decrease in the grant revenues. The expense side, personnel services makes up majority of the budget. Materials and supplies, and you will see there the base request of 381,779 and the decision packages for a total of 144,317. Explanation, we've eliminated the entire operation budget of $25,000 out of the admin and moved it to the grant side. You'll see that in the next, those special revenues. The decision packages approved by the city manager, we have proposing to eliminate 1 position that is currently vacant and have 1 staff person manage 2 grant programs. And so you'll see some reorganization outlined there with some net savings actually, which is a good thing. And no decision packages disapproved. Any questions?
Any questions? Mrs. Inco, does it cost any money? I know you guys do the home, what is it called, the classes that you guys give for people buying a home on that? Does that cost, because I know sometimes you have staff in there and you have marketing materials and all that.
We actually, we do sponsorships for the classes, and so the sponsors pay for the materials, so it doesn't cost the city.
It's kind of a wash. That's good, because I think you guys do a good job on that, so I
We
appreciate
educate a lot of folks, try to get them ready to make sure they're ready to buy that home.
it. Yeah. All right.
Moving on to custodial services, this is a relatively new division for me. I acquired it in November. The mission is to provide a clean, safe, and healthy environment for all of our city facilities and our employees and our residents. Their mission is pretty basic. They clean carpets, floors, and restrooms, dispose of trash, and collect our recyclables. Here are their metrics. We have custodians broken it down per square foot, how much square footage they each clean, and then we also have crew leaders who go in and also work with them as well. You'll see the cost per square foot of salaries and benefits, all other costs, total cost of $2.32 per square foot. Our goals are to increase employee retention in custodial services. We've historically had a high turnover. They're one of the lowest paid segments of our employees, and we do experience some turnover. We're doing some work on team building and doing some things to hopefully encourage more retention in that department. Our goals are also to maintain customer service levels at city facilities. It's going to be a challenge. We may have to do some modifications on scheduling, but we'll get through it and provide more of those team building opportunities as well for the staff. How the staffing fits into the enterprise is 1.77 FTEs in the fund, and in the enterprise is 1.25 in the enterprise, or FTEs in the enterprise. And the budget, the expenses in custodial services is 0.81%, and in the enterprise is 0.37%. We are proposing to not fund 2 positions, so we'll reduce staff by that 2 of the custodial positions. And when we're talking about making some adjustments because we're losing 2 staff, I've already explained to the staff, we may go to some different schedules. We may have to empty our own trash, but we're going to get through it. But our buildings are going to be good. Okay. So you'll see the revenue budget there. Operation fees, we currently contract to clean one outside agency, which is the Greater Killeen Free Clinic. They are located on the Killeen Arts and Activity Center campus, and so that decision was made several years ago that we would clean their building for a fee, and so those are the fees that we do collect. The expense side, we are heavy personnel. Materials and supplies, this accounts for all the cleaning supplies, materials, uniforms, all of that type of thing that custodial services uses. So you'll see a total of $665,250 for the expense. As I mentioned, unfunded two full-time positions that are currently vacant, so I'm not losing people, just the positions right now. No decision packages approved. And 2 were disapproved, which is the reinstatement of those 2 positions. Any questions on that budget?
I was just going to ask you, on those, are those full-time positions, do the custodial work 8 hours a day?
Yes.
And do they work, what is their hours? Do they work like evenings and nights, or?
Right now, they're working 5 a.m. to 1 p.m.
To 1 p.m.? And that's full-time right there?
And the reason for that is especially the public buildings, we need to have them open and ready to go when the public enters. We've looked at doing some changes to scheduling maybe later in the day, because what happens sometimes at the library, for instance, you have something that happens in the afternoon. restroom needs to be cleaned, that type of thing, and we got to call people back. So
So they're kind of on call all the time.
We do have an on-call, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
What, because you mentioned the turnover, is that considered, do they get full benefits and everything, or do they consider that like a starting, because I know, like you said, it's one of our lowest paying, but what type, is it young people that are looking at to start position like a McDonald's or?
You know, it's a cross-section. We have some long-term employees that are there. We have retired military who are looking for something to do, and we have people who just love to clean. And
Yeah.
so it's a cross-section.
Yeah, no, I bet it's a challenge. Mr. Okry?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Did you say you were losing positions versus people?
Well, the positions are currently vacant.
Okay.
Yes. So I'm losing 2 unfilled positions.
Positions, okay.
Yes, sir.
And my second question, you have money in the community development for the snacks?
I don't know. I'll have to look.
Start a GoFundMe account.
You and those snacks.
No snacks.
All right.
I don't remember what we
Anybody
provided
else?
either.
Mr. Olson?
This is one of the departments that I think is at the rock bottom now. I've been impressed with the kind of job they've done in terms of maintaining the buildings. Every time I walk into any building anywhere in the city, it looks good, and I don't want to sacrifice that. So the only thing that persuaded me here to go along with this reduction was the fact that they're currently vacant and they're still doing a good job. I just don't think, if we deal with this again next year, I don't think we can reduce it further without damaging their core mission. I think they've hit the rock bottom on this one.
What's the average pay? Do they get paid by the hour, or?
I think it's $9 or a little bit less than $9 an hour. And, what is it?
I think it's 908.
908. And we were talking earlier about turnover and retention. I think it might be important for the city council to know, in our public safety group, our annual turnover rate is less than 6%. In the general employees, including this group, it exceeds 25%. And that is an inefficient turnover rate. We have got to figure out how to get that turnover rate down. It's probably a little higher in this group than it is in the other general employees.
And that's why I was asking that question, what type of employees, because I don't know if this is a job that you really come into it and want to make it a long-term. It's not like, I wanted to be not to make fun of them because I know they work hard. Whereas everywhere else, they look at it as that's a career. And so if you got, like what you said, retired people, then that's okay. They just want something to do versus getting a real job. It's just a way to keep them busy. So I think that's one of the things that we have to figure out, because you can incentivize them, not saying not to give them a raise, but then they'll look at it and say, no, I want to do something else, you say, so.
I suspect if we paid a little bit more,
They'd stay.
we would, that they would stay.
Yeah.
Yeah, 95.
Mr. Okry?
And you're talking about this, that's another incentive you were talking about with the retirement system. I mean, money versus, hey, what can I get after I work for a period of time in that retirement TMRS?
Yeah.
That needs to be fixed. Because if people, you want to, that's to me, that would be a recruiting thing. That's what the Army did for me. You had benefits going in there and staying a period of time on the other side.
And healthcare, right? They get healthcare. Don't tell my employees that,
They'll leave you, huh? They will leave you.
Well, and especially when you're talking about people at the lowest end of our pay scale, they are not looking ahead to retirement. They are not looking ahead so much to other benefits. They're looking at how can I make ends meet today. And people at that particular location in our pay structure are the ones we need to be concerned most with their hourly pay. And whether it's a raise or not, to me, City employees should be paid at a fair and reasonable market rate, period. Whatever that market rate is, that's where they should be paid.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you, Ms. Hinkle.
Moving on.
Moving on, one more.
All right. We're going to move on to the Arts and Activity Center. So the mission of the Arts and Activity Center is to manage the public event space available at the Arts and Activity Center. The mission elements include marketing and booking of the events, event planning and coordination of those events, event setup and support, and facility cleaning and maintenance. Here are our metrics. You'll see the number of events that were booked, the number of persons attending those events. We also have events set up. We've done a lot of neat things there. We've installed a lot of new audio-visual components that the clients were asking for. And you also see the number of cleaning and maintenance of the square feet cleaned and maintained, 25,000, and the number of work orders completed. We've also done an increased advertising. We're right now running a campaign ad through the local cinema that talks about the Killeen Arts and Activity Center as well as the Civic and Conference Center. And we've implemented Facebook page to increase promotion of facility and public events as well. Here are our goals: to maintain customer service levels at our city event facilities, to continue to improve upon those audio and visual and sound equipment requests, and to provide a public entertainment venue with exceptional service and pricing for all of our citizens to utilize and enjoy, and continue to expand our advertising and promotions through social media, website, publications, and other special events. Here's the staffing. You'll see it's 0.66% in the general fund and 0.47% throughout the enterprise. And how it fits into the budget, you'll see it's 0.54% of expenses in the fund and 0.24% throughout the enterprise. Staffing looks like this. 6. Hasn't changed. Our revenues, you'll see operational fees of $78,518 and the total budget of $441,132. No decision packages declined or approved for a total of $441,132. Expenses, heavy on personnel, also materials and supplies, and you'll see the expense for $441,132 balanced. The explanation, we've reduced our professional services for maintenance of cleaning of the fountain. As you may know, we have this nice water feature, and you have to keep it clean. And it was costing us several $100s a month to do that. And we've trained staff now, and they go out every morning and clean out things they find and put the chemicals in, and it's nice for the next day. We've also reduced building maintenance, electrical expenses, and reduced some minor capital expenses for furniture and equipment at the CAC. No decision packages approved or disapproved. Any questions?
Mr. Kilpatrick.
You said that they maintain, this is above and beyond the custodial staff?
Yes,
So
because,
they do their own?
yes, what I have at the CAC is a little bit like what we have at the Civic and Conference Center. They set up for events, they tear down for events, and they also clean the facility. So they're doing more than just what a custodian does, come in and take care of the basic cleanliness. They're also doing event support.
Mrs. Fleming?
Ms. Hinkle, I like the way you've structured everything. You said you have staff going out cleaning the fountain, and that is what you call firing the maid and doing it yourself. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I pick up trash. I mean, it's just,
Yes.
you do what you gotta do. See a
Do what you
problem,
gotta
fix the
do.
problem.
I really like that, and I
So,
like
you
how
do what you gotta
structured
do.
that. And you're doing a great job. I
Thank
have
you.
to tell
Thank
you
you.
that.
Mr. Kilpatrick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have another question. With the movement of part of the city staff into the CAC, are you losing spaces for venues?
Not losing venue space, no, sir. We're losing that tenant space.
Are you losing conference, the where you had the places where you could rent boardrooms and conference
No,
rooms,
sir.
wedding.
No, all the civic space will remain for rent.
I have a question on, last year, I know that they turned over the memorial to us, right? That memorial, the November 5th, that's right
Oh, the
there,
November 5th Memorial.
with the
Yes, sir.
flags and
At the conference
everything
center.
at the conference
Yes,
center.
sir.
Is that something that we have to anticipate future maintenance or anything on that?
I believe that is handled through KBI, am I right, Brett?
They have a fund? Yeah, okay,
We clean that every morning as well. It's just part of our routine.
okay,
You just go out there and do what you gotta do.
gotta do it. All right. Anybody, Mr. Okrie?
Like November 5th, when you put some on city property like that, that's still, that organization is still paying bills, right? Electric bill, water bill, utility, they're paying a utility bill? So do they pay the electric bill or we pay it?
It's ours.
It's ours.
They turned it over to us. That's what I was saying last year, it was turned over to us, so it belongs to us.
Really?
Mhm.
All right.
At least I was there when they did it, so they said, Mr. Mayor, it's yours now. So, unless, I said, okay, thank you.
Can I get clarification on that? Because I thought I remembered that KBI was gonna pay for some of the expenses. So can we confer about that later?
Yeah.
I guess I need to find out who's paying the electric bill.
Yes.
Who's shining up all that brass?
I know,
That's,
I know.
They do a lot of good things, but they don't.
no. All right, well, thank you. We got library, oh, well.
I'm still here, okay. All right, now hang in there with us. Okay, so the mission of the library, the Killeen Public Library System, is to enrich lives by fostering literacy and community engagement, supporting reading for pleasure and research, and connecting people to information and ideas. Written like a true librarian. All right. The mission elements are to provide
Approved by a reluctance.
Yes, we had conversation about that. The mission elements are to provide access to books and materials, access to the electronic media, access to research and materials, and to provide learning activities to our community. So here are some of our metrics. Support reading for pleasure and research. You'll see the number of items owned, the number of items checked out, the number of visitors to the library, and our hours that we are open. And you'll see connecting people to information ideas, the number of patron computer sessions, online database searches, and the number of books downloaded. And then provide access to research materials, we have the number of library card holders and the number of informational assistance transactions. We do a lot of connecting people with resources when they come into the library. Under the learning activities, you'll see a list of things that are done there. Everything from preschool, story time, literacy events to summer reading, arts and craft for teens, and even adults. We're scheduling our very first adult spelling bee in September. Please come sign up. And
Wow, I love to spell.
everybody brush up, okay? No devices allowed, all right?
Was in college, I was in
And then we're also scheduling a family game day. We want to get more families involved in doing some really cool things with games. So I think going back to some fun games would be a great way. Okay, our goals for next year: expand programming for all ages to foster that lifelong learning and community engagement. We have rearranged, we're going to be rearranging the branch library to more efficient use of the space. We're going to reorganize our staffing to create a much leaner management structure at the library. And we're going to continue to increase visitability in the community and market our programming more aggressively and build partnerships with our local business leaders. We do have a Friends of the Library group, and they're very, very instrumental to the library, but we want to build more of those partnerships out there in the community. Sir? You know all. Okay. All right. So here's what the staffing looks like. 2.69 FTEs in the general fund and 1.90 in the enterprise. The budget is 1.73 of the expenses in the general fund and 0.79% in the enterprise. And so you'll see some reductions here. In 15-16, we had 17 employees, and current year 26.5, and proposed for 17-18, 24.34. You'll see an unfunded position and an unfunded manager, reference manager position, and then I'm going to be reducing or propose to reduce a children's service assistant to a part-time position. Here's the revenues. See, operational fees have increased a little bit, and the base budget is 1.422394. The explanation of that variance, we've had a small increase in patron printing. They're coming to the library and printing more documents and things like that. We've had to reduce our budget or resource by eliminating a current reference manager position and reducing a children's services assistant to a part-time position. And both of those changes align with our plans to streamline staffing at the main library. The expense side, you'll see, is heavy on personnel, materials and supplies, and a little bit of capital outlay, which are mainly books. And you'll see that the budget is at our budget cap. I explained all that to you, unfunded the reference manager position, reduced the children's services assistant position to part-time, and we're going to be providing a finished conversion of Killeen Daily Herald microfilm to digital format to preserve that historical reference. Decision packages approved or none, and decision packages disapproved was the reinstatement of those positions. Are there any questions or comments?
Any questions? Nope. Looks like you're good.
One more.
Mr. Okry.
Microfilm to digital. I get that paper every day in PDF format. So, how far back are we talking about with microfilm? We must be talking about way, way, way back.
Yes.
Okay. So it's just a matter of taking a picture of the microfilm and, wow.
I don't know. I will find out for you.
Do we get that from the, don't we get that from the paper, or it's provided by them, I think. We're not the ones that are doing the microfiches. Because I think they maintain that too, so. Mr. Harris.
I was going to say, as far as marketing, because I know I asked about this at one point, but as far as marketing, let's see, because I know when we had the Parks and Recreation Month, I went up there and talked to people at the library, and they were telling me all the services they had. I didn't realize all the services they had. And so I know I inquired about possibly, if we don't have one already, creating a video and putting it on the website that will allow us to market them, because right now, I don't know what they're, what do we do to market for them, to get them out there and for people to recognize them?
We're hitting hot and heavy Facebook, believe it or not. It's working really well, but I am on Hillary's calendar to get her folks to produce a video for us.
Good deal.
Because there's a lot of cool stuff that's happening.
There is.
in the library.
I was impressed. I'm not gonna lie. I was impressed. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I believe this might be the last one.
It is. It is the last one. Uh-huh.
Not for tonight, though. All right. Okay. So moving on to lien services.
Last one.
Okay. So the mission of lien services is to bill and collect for code enforcement abatement actions. Pretty simple. They bill for code enforcement actions and they collect for code enforcement actions. You'll see the metrics there for you, the billing and the collection of those actions. Our goals for next year: increase the collection of liens to increase revenues, obviously. Collect and notify property owners of the liens. Attend to tax sales and provide lien information to the prospective buyers. Educate our property owners on the importance of property maintenance and city ordinances, and reduce the amount of those uncollectible liens. Here's what that staffing looks like for the general fund. It's 0.22% FTEs in the fund and 0.16 in the enterprise. How that looks in the budget is 0.17% in the fund and 0.08 in the enterprise. Staffing, 222. Here's what the revenue looks like. 143,661. And the expense side, you'll see is personnel, materials and supplies, and that 143,661. The reduction for the expense side is because of those recording fees with Bell County. So that's where you'll see that difference there. And the decision package approved by the city manager is a net 3,168. None disapproved. City manager's comments, and I think there's one after that. Do you want to talk to them about that?
This department or this function is really one of the evolutionary things that's happened in the city. And what ended up happening was this is essentially a finance function that somehow ended up in Leslie's department some years ago. And I just think it would be more efficient and better functioning if it went into the finance department and was used there. Now the other thing is, you look at the level of activity. You've got two people supporting that level of activity. And when I look at that, I mean, I know collections is hard work. I know it's time consuming, but I can't help but think that there's some additional time that should be available between those two full-time jobs. And if we put them into the finance department, I'm confident that the people in the finance department will assist them in doing the collecting and also find other supporting jobs for them to do during their, if they can become more efficient and have some additional time available, it can be importantly used in the finance department. So my proposal here is that we transfer these people into the finance department, out of Leslie's department into John's department.
Everybody okay with that?
100%.
All right.
Absolutely.
Any questions for Leslie? Mr. Harris?
As far as when we decided to actually start waiving the liens now at auctions, I mean, do we have any kind of guesstimates or?
Actually, that hasn't happened yet.
Okay,
Because
okay.
here's what happened. You decided to waive the liens on those 27 properties that are in trust.
Mhm.
So they haven't had a sheriff's sale yet on those 27 properties. But we're in the midst of locating adjoining property owners to find out if they would be interested in maybe going to the sheriff's sale and looking at those properties. So that hasn't happened yet. But I believe October Bell County Appraisal District did tell me that they expect to have a sale in October, and some of those properties would be on there.
Would it be possible for us to, even so, list those property addresses online? I mean, in case somebody was interested, I mean, the bigger the pool, the better the potential.
I believe so.
Because I've had a few people asking me, you know, about some of the property addresses and where they were located, and I had to try to go back and look through my paperwork, but, yeah, me and paper, yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Rivera.
They go to Bell County appraiser back there. The only thing they gotta do is just look up, and it's public information. Those things are public information.
Whatever. You decide.
All right.
Glad to do.
Like online, yeah, online.
We're getting another break.
I think everybody wants another break, so we're going to take another 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
We said that we'd finish up the general fund on August the 8th. We have like 10 more to go. That's been scheduled for August the 8th is finish it.
So you want to finish it up at a later date, is what you're saying?
It's already scheduled on his matrix.
It's scheduled to January 8th.
So do we want to cease? Is that what we're saying about here?
Yeah.
So instead of a break, do we want to adjourn and just continue?
So move.
All right, so motion adjourned. Second, all those in favor, we're gone. So let's all get out of here before Mr. Johnson gets back from the bathroom.
Whoever's idea that was. Thank you, Mr.